Welcome everybody, I'm T Johnny and this is a huge but I think a very important and very necessary video. In my opinion, Season 6, 7 and 8 of SpongeBob SquarePants always get the short end of the stick. There has been that way of thinking in the general public that those seasons are just the worst thing that has ever come to this planet, which is just not true. Throughout the years, I just saw so much hate from people towards those seasons, to the point where apparently you just can't enjoy them casually. And I believe a huge and perhaps the main reason are certain reviewers from back in the day who just bashed on these episodes with so much anger and negative expression that just made everybody automatically hate on certain episodes, and by extension those 3 seasons in general. What also doesn't help are people called sponge boomers, who just grew up with seasons 1, 2 and 3 and call everything after the first movie to be just total garbage, which for me is just such a ridiculous statement, given how many amazing episodes exist in every season of SpongeBob. With all respect to every reviewer and every person online, it's perfectly fine to have an opinion on something, but because certain people had too much influence on the public and they had such an iron fist on those episodes, it just feels like the reputation of seasons 6, 7 and 8 have been just irreversibly damaged. I'm not going to hide the fact that SpongeBob is one of my favorite cartoons of all time, and I genuinely feel bad when, for example, I watch season 6 episodes and I enjoy them, only to later see people on the internet just bashing on them and saying stuff, "Oh, this episode is garbage because a YouTuber said so." It feels like people are just too afraid of saying something positive about this era, because they're like being afraid of being hated on. People just get that satisfaction of bashing on the episodes online. And it kind of feels like with everything nowadays. A new movie came out? Well, it's garbage. A new game came out? It's garbage. A new show came out? It's garbage. We just live in that weird era now where people just hate everything. It just feels like we are not allowed to enjoy something these days. But I digress. I am not afraid to defend these seasons. So this is why I made this video. A good example of this is Home Sweet Rubble from Season 8. But oh no, the episode title and the premise of renovating SpongeBob's house is just like from the Season 1 Home Sweet Pineapple. So naturally, people just judge the book by its cover and say Home Sweet Rubble is just a ripoff. They are running out of ideas. Garbage. Without giving this episode a chance, because it actually has a different plot than Home Sweet Pineapple, and I really like it. Side note number 1, just as I think that seasons 6 to 8 are overhated, I begin to think that seasons 1 to 3 are overrated. Don't get me wrong, I still think the most of the pre-movie era is golden, but they are not the only golden seasons. In my previous video I said that over the time my style has probably changed a little, and I might think differently about the episodes. Not much probably, but I've watched all of my previous videos from this series. I don't want to say they're a bit cringy at times, but I would definitely say different stuff about some of the episodes. Which I'm not going to do, by the way. I mostly agree with my past self, so let's stick to it. But I think I have changed my mind now, and perhaps I should go back to those seasons and review it again with my new point of view. If you didn't know, I have a tier list video for every season up to this point, as well as some other content, and a whole second, much older channel, which I'm pretty sure you will like, but I digress. People just look at seasons 4, 5, 6, 8, 11 with nostalgia goggles and constantly compare them with the pre-movie seasons, which is just silly. I grew up with all these seasons. Every season has its own unique style. Of course they will be different. It hurts to see people automatically dislike season 5 or like season 11 just because they are not like the pre-movie era. Like season 11, it's one of my favorites. When, let's say, season 3 has a worse episode, it just gets swept under the rug because you can't say anything bad about season 3. But when season 11 gets worse episode, you guessed it, the whole season just gets labeled as garbage. And because reviewers over-exaggerate everything. And you may think, hey, maybe I'm exaggerating right now. And I can see your point, but people really are like that. Every cartoon, even the most classic of classics, they also had bad episodes, and that's completely okay. Stop focusing on bad episodes of children cartoons and just enjoy the rest. All the unique new styles and wackiness. Of course, there will be some episodes that I agree will be pretty bad, and even I won't be able to defend them, but it's just a handful of them. And honestly, why don't people just ignore them? Stop giving them so much spotlight and just focus on others. You'll be surprised how many times I will say this episode is not that bad. Side note number 2. Perhaps those seasons are home to your favorite episodes, and that's great. Despite trying to be really positive, there is a slim chance that I don't think about an episode just like you do. So I might not put your favorite episode in the S tier. And side note number 3. You're probably wondering, despite being in the title of the video, I never mentioned anything about Season 9A until now. Well, Season 9A is something entirely different, and we'll get to that. I apologize if this intro is too lengthy, but I really wanted to explain the whole situation and give you my point of view. I really hope you are going to enjoy this video. But even after all of this, you will still disagree with me. That's totally fine. I'm really curious what do you think, so feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. I think this is a great topic to debate. And without further ado, let's jump right into Season 6. Season 6 is like one of the, if not the most controversial season of SpongeBob. Which, again, as I said, I disagree with. While I agree that statistically it has more bad episodes than other seasons, statistics are a double-edged sword. It's really easy to use statistics for manipulation. People will see a pie chart that is being compared to another one that is displaying way more bad stuff, and people will just naturally judge that season by having more bad stuff. Again, ignoring all the good stuff a season has to offer. This is where I must confess. I know I'm doing pie charts myself. And now I myself have conflicting thoughts about doing that. And it seems like I'm just contradicting myself. Yes, I think doing pie charts might be a bit misleading, but I also have that different side of me who just loves comparing numbers to each other. Nonetheless, I am aware that my rating system may be flawed a bit. For example, an episode in D tier gets 1 point on my scoring system. Maybe they should get 0 instead. Because as for now, if a season has 47 segments, the lowest possible score will be 47 instead of 0. But I've been doing that since the very beginning and it would be really difficult to change it now, so who cares really. And again, I could just revisit seasons 1, 2 and 3 with my new point of view. I'm pretty sure some ratings would change. There are too many episodes in S tiers now that I look at it. But I digress again. Season 6. Mostly hated for the amount of bad episodes, and a lot of the visual gross-out humor is present in like every episode, and I can see why people may dislike it. However, if producers wanted this to be the style of the season, I'm totally gonna respect it. So I'm only gonna bring this up if it's really an issue. Besides, if you've watched my previous videos, you will know that I'm a fan of dark and gross-out humor. So it doesn't bother me as much. So therefore, I guess there might be some bias from my side. But even all that gross-out humor is slightly overhated. And naturally, this is the trusty tier list. And again, it is all just my opinion. It is okay to disagree. Honestly, it doesn't bother me that this episode is presented in a home TV show style. That's something different. I love the design of Squilliam's home, the exaggeration and parody of a rich snob, the rivalry between him and Squidward. I absolutely loved how Squilliam said, "Hello, peasants!" Although there's a huge inconsistency with the roof. Squidward's panicking throughout the episode is really funny, as well as SpongeBob. There's a lot of great jokes and humor, how SpongeBob screws everything up. The toilet scene was a bit more weird than amusing. And the toenail scene, while I agree it is a bit too graphic, it isn't too bad and it doesn't last for long. And it fits within my sense of humor. It has almost zero effect on the entire episode and its score, which goes into S tier. Everything paid off at the end and Squidward actually won with Squilliam in a very clever way, so that's a huge plus. So for the longest time I didn't actually realize that the title of the episode was a reference to the Beatles' Abbey Road. And I think that's really cool cause I kinda like their songs. But anyway, first, I think they made a really good job on this music-themed episode. It's a bit weird that Plankton is in this really high security jail just for attempting to steal Krabby Patty formula. Maybe all these attempts in the past accumulated? That would make sense. The humor is great, all these shenanigans of Plankton trying to get the secret formula but just failing are hilarious. I love all of their designs as rock stars, and how they are truly engaged into being this rock band. Even Squidward is happy. It's an S-tier episode. It has tons of funny jokes and moments. Some of them are my favorite from the entire series. I actually forgot how entertaining this one is. This episode is weird, like at the very edge of being just weird and being funny weird. I think it slips into being funny. The main plot is obviously Mr. Krabs having a paranoia over SpongeBob's penny, and those paranoia plots in SpongeBob are always super amazing. This one is no exception. While I agree, some scenes are out of place, like the beginning sequence is like repeated twice, and at the very end it turned out that wasn't a penny after all. I enjoyed pretty much everything else, even Mr. Krabs' paranoid design a bit. And I like all of those ideas. He tried to get the penny out of SpongeBob, and just like Plankton, failing over and over. I thought that would go to an A, but I believe it can go to a low S tier. Mr. Krabs' paranoia was going a bit too far, but it wasn't that obnoxious or anything. He even ended the episode on a funny joke of fake apology, only to start digging outside SpongeBob's house. So honestly, I'm a bit mixed on this episode. Starting from the beginning, I understand how it feels to do something until it's very late and you had very little sleep at night, and when you try to impress somebody, that's relatable. But later in the episode, SpongeBob just becomes this brainiac and takes over the tour, which made me feel sorry for Mrs. Puff. Then we actually get a cool scene when SpongeBob activates the whole museum and tries to stop it, but it also turns out that it didn't make any sense at all, since apparently the boat was tugged to the maintenance. After all these flip-flops, also I'm pretty sure Bikini Bottom doesn't have millions of citizens. The whole scene was awesome, but the very ending was stupid. I guess it all bounces out to being like a B-tier episode. At least the maintenance guy wanted to cheer SpongeBob up. It's always cool when Plankton comes up with an idea that attracts a lot of people. Good for him! I also love how initially the same people don't care about Plankton's Colosseum until Plankton mentions that it's free. I guess a Colosseum and gladiator fights are pretty cool in general. Plankton really puts Patrick into danger, and that was shocking to me. Obviously they will never show anything brutal. The episode goes into the A tier. Some of the scenes are a bit slow and kinda weird, like the beginning, their laugh at the very end, and how Plankton pretty much ruins his own plan. But I guess he gets his comeuppance. But still, the scenes with lions are pretty funny, and I really love how Mr. Krabs just keeps one at the Krusty Krab. Alright, I don't know why at the beginning when SpongeBob thinks Squidward was making certain noises, it all was just a misunderstanding, was really hilarious. I understand Squidward's struggle with writing something, and it's nice for SpongeBob and Patrick for trying to help, but they immediately turn 180 degrees after all this and start annoying Squidward, which I guess it's alright because he wrote them into the symphony, which itself sounds really great. It was a twist and it turned out to be good, but the sequence itself of writing it was ever so slightly annoying. It deserves an A tier. It's kinda messy, but more positive than negative. It's another music theme episode, which is not a bad thing, and overall Squidward has won at the very end. Let's be honest, this is an outstanding episode. I can easily relate to SpongeBob being this hyperactive, childish person that is just annoying, and people are wishing me to be more mature. I know how it is, and seeing SpongeBob trying to be normal is surreal. But it's all in a good way. Even when he is normal, he still behaves a bit annoying to others, but hey, no one is perfect. I really like how SpongeBob changed in personality and the design, and how he struggles to go back to his old self. And that whole scene of him re-weirding is so fun. It's easily an S-tier episode. It's filled with great jokes and humor, and it all makes sense. And I don't know if you have noticed, but that video footage of Mr. Normal is reminiscent to the scene in Doing Time that presents normal life. That is boring and mundane. Dark humor, but I love it. Gone features another of my favorite concepts in shows and movies. A character being the only person alive in a city. I love it every single time. It's funny and wholesome for SpongeBob to try and imitate everybody, to kinda have this normal life, and then how he is just goofing around in the boat. Later he develops some sort of paranoia with the boat and all. Honestly, I don't think that was entirely real, mostly in his head, because in real life an isolated person really starts to develop hallucinations and basically starts becoming crazy, especially after weeks. So it's good that the episode accounted for it. So I'm glad that they did something from a psychological perspective too. The episode goes into the A tier. The concept is great, but I feel like they could have done something more with that. And the ending is bizarre, but I kinda like it. I understand the characters and that they would like to have a break from SpongeBob. So the big idea was obviously to make a gross and painful episode. And blah blah blah, I like dark and gross like humor, so for me this episode isn't that bad. The first half is perfectly fine, the opening is energetic, and SpongeBob actually tried to have a normal day at work despite having the splinter, and that's what the episode should have been. But the true problem is with the middle part. We are just wasting time with Squidward stalling SpongeBob, and this is just unnecessary. The splinter itself isn't the main problem with the episode, it's honestly the writing of everything else. Then we get scenes of Patrick trying to remove the splinter, and it's kind of funny, mixed with Patrick being a bad person. And at the very end, well, I like how they react to the splinter, and honestly, something about the sludge coming from the thumb and it healing, it has something satisfying in it. It's like Dr. Pimple Popper. Alright, I'm sorry. Episode goes into the C tier. Trust me, it's not the worst thing ever. Some of the sludge could have been cut out, like when it drops to Squidward's eye. And fun fact, there are almost no bubble transitions in this episode, which means it actually takes place in 11 minutes in the universe. I guess that's kinda cool. This episode is just so fun. Sure, the beginning with SpongeBob and Patrick can be a bit annoying, but their choreography, so to speak, with a slight whistle and the visual humor are great, and has some sort of charm into it. This kind of annoying Squidward is done much better than usual, but the episode really starts being fun when he actually joins them and has so much fun with it, even going way too far. This episode is just so hype and entertaining to watch. It's obvious that it goes to the S tier, besides that song that plays throughout the episode. It's actually called Slide Whistle Stooges, and it's one of the best original tracks in the show. Also, the ending may be a bit strange, but it's not enough to lower the score. This episode is just alright. So its premise is to be extreme, and now I'm kinda neutral to those sorts of things. It's nice to have a Larry-focused episode, but on the other hand, the moral of living on the edge and like a day would be your last is not actually a good moral, especially when you are young and have whole life ahead of you. When you do extreme stuff, if you have an accident, this might end the whole career for you. Even SpongeBob pointed out that you shouldn't really risk your life. But hey, I'm not telling you how to live. You should have some fun in your life, obviously, but take it easy. And take care. The episode doesn't really do a lot wrong, and a lot of the visuals are pretty great. They keep you hyped, actually. I think it deserves an A. SpongeBob also changes his mind at the very end, which was like, but at least the hospital scene was funny. So we get another beach-themed episode. And honestly, I don't like going there. Also, being exposed to the sun for too long damages your skin and can cause cancer. So half an hour of sunlight every day is like maximum for me to get that vitamin D. And I don't go out without a sunscreen. But enough about myself, back to the episode. So I can obviously see an issue. Even though the characters are fish and it's all about a tan, it can be easily interpreted as skin color discrimination, which is not good. But the episode still has a lot of positives though. Like there's that overall energy going throughout. A lot of good moments. Patrick trying to help SpongeBob was funny. I liked that radical old man commercial, as well as I genuinely felt bad for SpongeBob. I guess it can actually go to a low A tier. So this episode kinda doesn't make sense at the beginning. Squidward is obviously using some sort of a fertilizer to help his kelp grow, but all of a sudden it becomes that magic spray that can just make everything bigger. So that's quite a big issue. They should have made that spray magical from the very beginning and make a plot of this episode like Pranks a Lot, for example. But they don't stick to the plot anyway, it changes right in the middle. Well, it is just all about giant Squidward. It's nice how he tried to prove himself to people that he isn't a bad monster, and later on I really felt bad for him. So did SpongeBob and Patrick. I adore how they really tried to cheer him up, but the ending was kinda rushed. They made that giant clarinet out of Squidward's kelp. that wouldn't be possible. The episode is A tier. It's not as bad as people are making it. This episode is so fun, the concept is pretty neat and is really well executed. Even though it breaks the continuity, Patrick had a nose and used it to smell other things a lot of times before. But let's ignore that. It's natural for him to want to have a nose, for the context of this episode at least, and they wrote this episode really well. It's satisfying to see Patrick enjoying all these smells, and it's really hilarious when he finds out there are also horrible smells and tries to act against them. I don't need to say that this one goes to the S tier. It's so entertaining, and I'm glad it actually turned out to be an issue for everybody. I like how everybody teamed up to defeat Patrick's nose. This episode is full of great jokes, including taking off the bandages and the very last bit with the ears. Patty Caper has another of my favorite concepts. Characters running around and interrogating other characters to basically solve a mystery. It's so amusing. SpongeBob is obviously not going to figure anything out, and all the flashbacks he is making up are great. It's an S tier episode. Honestly, this one and the previous one feel like they were ripped straight from season 5, with all the positive energy. As always, there's a lot of great humor. The ending is so funny. It makes sense that Mr. Krabs would be the one who stole the ingredient. Plankton's regular is a simple one. Plankton has got a customer that likes his stuff, and obviously Mr. Krabs doesn't like that and tries to take him back for some reason. Why won't he just let Plankton be happy? They have a nice rivalry, but that's basically it. And at the very end, it turns out that the customer was just paid by Karen, and that's just so wholesome. The episode goes in the A tier. It's simple and mostly positive, even though still Mr. Krabs just wants to see Plankton unhappy for his own entertainment. I have no idea what happened to SpongeBob to change his personality that much for this one episode, just so randomly. Honestly, it might be the first episode of season 6 that I can't really defend. It may as well be as bad as people are making it. I feel so bad for Squidward. SpongeBob and a lot of the characters just act out of character. I must unfortunately say, this one is a frustrating watch. I'm afraid we have our first D tier episode. The one truly good thing about this episode is that weird driving around montage and that weird laboratory, but this isn't enough to bring this episode higher. But hey, every season has a bad episode. Once again, we have another plot that I just really enjoy in many different cartoons. Now we have characters printing newspapers and spreading lies about everybody. I actually remember seeing this in Squirrel Boy of all things. Does anyone remember that? Anyway, we have got what you could expect. SpongeBob is just doing some journalism and Mr. Krabs enhances it. It's funny. Obviously, it all turns back to Mr. Krabs at the very end of the episode for lying and ruining people's lives, but he deserved that. It's an A tier episode. I can see why people might not like it. Mr. Krabs is unlikable here and the ending is really stupid. They still tried to make Mr. Krabs a winner. But on the other hand, I really appreciate that SpongeBob decided to fight Mr. Krabs. I think it's another one that is not that bad. I understand that Mr. Krabs doesn't fully trust Pearl to leave her alone with her friends at home, even though obviously Pearl is smart enough not to let everything like that happen. It was funny to see Krabs destroying SpongeBob's house, but I kinda feel bad for Pearl for her slumber party to be interrupted all the time. However, I guess this episode is still filled with great visual humor and jokes, and it's pretty energetic. The slumber party, however, is still being destroyed by SpongeBob, even though boys clearly weren't allowed, and the ending was kinda neat. Overall, I think it goes to a low A tier. While there are jokes and very good moments, I am a bit bothered that Party was ultimately destroyed by Mr. Krabs, and he himself was kinda unlikable. I am not a fan of this premise. First, it's terrible to look at Gary in this episode. Not only the design of him doesn't look good at all, earlier in this episode it's just heartbreaking to see him so neglected. Does it mean that SpongeBob actually doesn't care about him? Second, I just don't like seeing how all the other pets are being treated in general. I'm not sure how it is in real life with those pets contests, but in this episode they are clearly in a lot of pain. So if this episode was made to be like against pet contests, that's fine, I guess. I just really don't like any of it here. It goes into the C tier. What saves it is the ending when the pets go on a rampage and get their revenge on their owners for what they have done to them. Honestly, I love this episode for what SpongeBob was initially meant to be. Full of Polynesian and Hawaiian lore, landscapes and all of that. Pretty much enjoy everything present in this episode. The tropical islands the characters are stuck on are beautiful, and I like all of their subplots. All the introduced characters are very cool guys. There's some high stakes, good atmosphere. It's definitely one of the better specials. The beginning was kinda and Mr. Krabs' subplot isn't the worst. The climax is definitely up there though. It was really an awesome sequence. I also love the lore they made for the big one, how it needs a specific planet arrangement and all. It's easily an S-tier special. Great adventure with good humor and good plot. Before Porous Pockets really starts off, we need to go through a rough beginning at the jellyfish fields. But even then, it's not really that bad because they actually try to help the clam. It becomes really funny when they get all the cash. Unfortunately, they had to make a plot where they all spend that money really fast in order to fit within 11 minutes. But once SpongeBob gets super snobby in the mansion, this is where the episode gets really hilarious. I almost put it in the S tier, but I guess all the minor flaws drag this episode down a bit. And that drags it to the A tier. Like the setup is going for way too long. But I'm a sucker for these kinds of plots, so this is why it gets so high. And once again, we have amazing episodes in season 6, just randomly interlaced with those horrible stinkers like this one. You've probably seen this coming, but I can't really defend it. Only other time when SpongeBob was so out of character was in Boating Buddies. Why are they doing this? And also, unlike other music-themed episodes, this one actually hurts your ears. And visual humor also suffers. Just look at this frame. Naturally, I feel bad for Squidward. SpongeBob doesn't have to and shouldn't behave like that. Yeah, I'm putting this one in the D tier. But if I had to squeeze some good stuff, I like how the choir sounds like, this face Squidward makes, and how SpongeBob actually sounded pretty good towards the end. But there's way more bad than good, obviously. Squidward loses at the end, and we are being told that Squidward hasn't used his toilet since yesterday. Nobody cares, gross! Much like the inmates of summer last season, here SpongeBob and Patrick again must act oblivious to the danger around them in order to survive everything they are being thrown at. And again, it works. The whole episode is just that. They become invulnerable to everything after being told this is just a play, and I guess everything the champions do is amusing. But there is not really much else to this episode, just them taking every punch throughout the episode. And the ending is kinda dumb, but Mr. Krabs gets his comeuppance, so it works. Overall, I think this episode can go to the B tier. So this episode was clearly made to keep you at the edge of your seat. Patrick is specifically in those situations just to spite SpongeBob and the viewers. I kinda like it, and you know everything will be okay at the end of the episode. I think it can go to the B tier. It's obviously exaggerated, but it's not all that bad. I kinda feel bad for SpongeBob, and I agree the overall premise might be a bit dumb, and the beginning is slow and painful. In my opinion, it's all like in the middle. So I find it really wholesome that SpongeBob sent a letter to the Vikings, and by all these coincidences, they responded. It's another episode that got a short end of the stick. People think this is boring, but in my opinion, all the interactions between SpongeBob, Squidward and the Vikings made me laugh upon rewatching. Well, you may argue that this episode only takes place in one place, but that's how it used to be on the open sea during the Viking times. They had to spend weeks sailing, so that's not a problem. I also enjoyed Squidward's story about the Vikings. It's obviously fake, but it was so hilarious. And I also liked how the Vikings introduced themselves, and later how they actually had no idea what to show SpongeBob and Squidward. So they had to make up something really quickly. That was really funny. If I had to point out the episode's problems, it would be only the setup is a bit too long and the ending was kinda rushed. But overall, I'm gonna put this in the A tier. Why is this episode so relatable? You want to do something on a specific day, but you cannot due to your duties. So you are planning how to avoid all the responsibility and stuff. I've been there many times. This episode is an enjoyable watch, and it's funny to see all the situations that happen to SpongeBob. I think this is an A tier episode. One of the best jokes in the entire show are those gummy fish for sure. It's a pretty simple and harmless episode. So that's a much better executed version of Dear Vikings. Instead, now we have the Krusty crew trying to impress somebody. I honestly love how Mr. Krabs goes this far to impress his grandpa. And their plan sure looks great. It's honestly an S-tier episode. It honestly does everything correctly with faking the adventure. And this is all just so funny. It's also great to see at the very end that Mr. Krabs acknowledges it was all a lie, but it all turns out to be good. This whole episode is fantastic. So this episode gets bonus points for taking place mostly at night. I'm not really bothered at the beginning when Squidward is very happy and SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs are curious why is that, knowing how Squidward is, and I really like the concept of those secret societies. Well, it does kinda suck that SpongeBob and Patrick really ruin Squidward's good time, but hey, They actually acknowledge that and try to apologize, as well as just cheer him up. Although this episode does take a turn like in the middle when SpongeBob and Patrick decide to create their own societies, it's still not all that bad. Feather Friends were actually pretty funny, and I also enjoyed the ending when SpongeBob and Patrick tried to bring Squidward back to the lodge and created that fake eel. Well, again, they ruin it, but it's just the ending, so that's not a big deal. Overall, I think it can land in the A tier. It's definitely one of those overhated ones. So I kinda don't understand SpongeBob here. Why does he want Squidward to visit him so badly? If someone doesn't want to visit me, I just shrug it off. And I agree, SpongeBob really does get too far with redecorating his house. And he literally stole Squidward's vacuum cleaner to lure him there. Well, from a dark humor perspective, I really like it, but from the teaching morals perspective, it all fails. We shouldn't behave like SpongeBob here. It's really creepy. And also Squidward just unnecessarily gets punished for all of this. Yeah, it is a D tier episode. His house also burns at the end. But he got this exact replica in SpongeBob's house, so maybe he didn't actually lose anything? I kinda wish they made a plot where instead of SpongeBob redecorating his house, he tricked Squidward to coming to his own house? Something like that, I don't know. I love how they made such a big deal at the very beginning that SpongeBob changes his pants. But I wish they actually kept it a big deal throughout the entire episode, which it actually isn't. This was like the 10th anniversary of the series, so they made this episode to kind of parody the show itself and make a soft reboot. And honestly, that's not a bad idea, just poorly executed. This is why it's gonna land in the B tier. It's not horrible. Patrick, Sandy and Squidward made SpongeBob think he's a different person, which is really hilarious. Stuff at the Krusty Krab gets a bit slowish, but the highlight of the episode is definitely how Squidward and SpongeBob were having fun together, and SpongeBob basically transformed into Squidward. So this episode is not about shuffleboarding, so I'm not sure why they call it like that, especially that they made such a big deal of it. Maybe because Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy were thinking that SpongeBob and Patrick were doing shuffleboarding the entire episode. Anyway, the plot we actually get is alright. It was kinda amusing to see them abusing their powers. Honestly, that's another one that I thought it's gonna be much worse, but it wasn't really. And there were actually plenty of funny moments. I'll put this episode in B tier. It's okay, still nothing really special, but a pretty good watch. I really dislike this episode, and I'm not gonna hide it. We've got another unbearable and obnoxious behaviors from like everybody. Squidward is just lying, SpongeBob and Patrick pop out of nowhere and suddenly just ruin Squidward's day. They are just giggling and just annoying everybody, both in the class and the viewers, even if they kinda try to be creative with the annoyance. And you could argue that Squidward actually deserved it for lying. I personally feel frustrated. This is a D tier episode and I'm really not gonna defend it. Same with this one, really. So first major problem with this episode, and actually the previous one as well, is the face SpongeBob is making all the time. It's like the worst in the series. Second of all, I know they wanted to be gross in this season, but they really dialed it up to 11 here. I'm really not a fan of the worm. It's too gross and disturbing. Besides, SpongeBob just took a wild animal to his house. I wouldn't like anything like that in my house. And they are also mean to Gary. And then it is revealed that the worm was pregnant and gave birth to more gross and disturbing worms. And Gary just gets rid of the mother. And they are squirting goo on everybody. Then Larry wanted to eat them, which was really disturbing. It just gets to the D tier, and suddenly they're apparently valuable now. This is such a random thing to put at the end. Yeah, I really dislike this episode. I'm not even gonna try to defend it. Also, if these worms are worth fortune, and there are only 4 of them, Mr. Krabs is only gonna earn like 24 bucks for these, so he's ripping himself off. Okay, so enough of those bad episodes. Now it's time for some good ones. I enjoy all those little fights between Plankton and Karen. I really like the designs of Plankton's inventions, as well as the merge design. It really looks solid and like something that could potentially take on Mr. Krabs and the Krusty Krab. I wish we could see more of that stuff that thing could do, but I guess being connected to a power socket is a cool weakness. It's a simple but S-tier episode. So the fact that SpongeBob is pretty oblivious to all the situations around him doesn't bother me at all. It's hilarious to see him just believe everything Squidward says, and slowly turning the Krusty Krab into a big mess. It's an S-tier episode. It's a great and funny, enjoyable watch from start to finish. It's always fun to see SpongeBob and Squidward have fun together, just like it was in 2 SquarePants or Not 2. Overbooked is another one of those super relatable ones. I also many times tried to do a lot of stuff for a lot of people at once, and I assume a lot of you did too. I honestly perfectly understand SpongeBob here, and all those situations are pretty realistic. It's understandable that he must go through a lot of stress. And honestly, it's never possible to do a lot of stuff at once, and the episode teaches us that. We should always focus on one thing and just try to explain it to others. And besides the moral, the episode itself is hilarious. How all SpongeBob's situations are overlapping each other and how he makes excuses for all of these. And the ending is pretty neat. I feel really bad for Patrick in this episode. It kinda hurts to watch him being put in such pain. After some time it feels just so bad to watch this. And the joke itself becomes repetitive. And Mr. Krabs is just evil. But on the other hand, I really like how SpongeBob tried to defend and help Patrick in this situation. And the climax of the episode was pretty funny. And Mr. Krabs got his comeuppance. It can go to A tier. Honestly, despite all the bad in this episode, it was a really cute and wholesome story for Patrick. Another one of my favorite concepts in cartoons. Characters getting locked in a store overnight and having some fun and then conflict. You may think the beginning is a bit sluggish, but for me, it helps set up the episode. And honestly, I don't think it takes that long. After all this, it's just a fun little adventure inside, especially at night, and I wish we had more screen time of this. I also like how they prepare to fight and how the villain turns out to be a toy Patrick set up earlier, and the ending joke was just hilarious. It also lands in A tier. Another beach episode, but this time the concept is so well made. I wish playing with sand was this fun. Starting from the beginning, I like how they made it to the beach without being too annoying. And then the competition between them had a lot of excellent concepts and animation. The episode goes to the S tier. The tension and stakes just rise with every minute, and it's so fun. Those episodes that aren't that bad as people think are just piling up this season. This episode starts up with a cool sequence of SpongeBob sneaking up to whatever he thinks is in the kitchen. I agree, Gary's damaged back is a bit too detailed and being shown for too long, but at least SpongeBob really tried to help him. Angry Jack's commercial is just hilarious, and so are all the shenanigans at the store. I don't know why, but every time SpongeBob breaks a shell, it's just so funny. A perfect dumb humor for me, I guess. This episode goes to the A tier. Although yeah, a few scenes like SpongeBob disassembling himself was a bit weird. And in general, I just felt bad for Gary. And the ending with Mr. Krabs was a bit odd, but this is just that season 6 charm for you. I can describe Chum Bucket Supreme as just being simple and harmless. Again, it's nice to see Plankton succeed, and it's really funny to see Patrick help him of all people. And all of this is just a nice little adventure. Episode lands in the A tier. I pretty much enjoyed every of those little sequences present here. Patrick's brain, Plankton and Karen, Patrick and Plankton, Mr. Krabs and SpongeBob, and the ending was okay too. Again, simple, fun and harmless. And we got another Plankton-themed episode right after. But I can already say I don't like this one as much, because it's mostly about love. Even though, yeah, the premise is wholesome, SpongeBob helping Plankton is great, and there are a lot of funny jokes, I can still only give it a B tier because of the love. The song and the ending are okay. My favorite jokes here are just Plankton referring to internal organs all the time, and that's it. Also, Plankton just did all of this to get the formula anyway, so what a jerk. So this is the biggest fish in the ocean probably, the true 10th anniversary of SpongeBob. And how do I start with this? Maybe I'll start with the fact that I really enjoyed it as a kid, and it's one of the most overhated episodes ever. So first, I kinda like this idea of Patchy slowly losing his mind because he's being exposed to everything related to SpongeBob and wanting to have a successful show, but it takes way too long and it's just unnecessary and quickly gets boring. It all should have been just some quick gags of him just calling these people and failing in this, but like for 2 minutes only. His mental health just unnecessarily deteriorates and I feel really bad for him. Thankfully, I enjoy all the scenes with him in the second half of the episode, when he shows us all that good stuff, all the alternate intros, the old animation, and his dream when he meets SpongeBob is pretty neat. Besides, I remember always watching a version of this episode without all these celebrities, so I don't really care as much. And then there's the actual episode. I can also say that I really enjoy the music numbers at the end and the beginning, and later on those flashbacks are always fun to watch. Whether they are true or not, they are just fun. The beginning is kinda not really terrible. Their little adventure in Vents is amusing. The surveillance room is really weird, but it's also dark humor, so it's funny. The escape scene is really cool, and at the very end, it all turned out to be good and went back to normal. So in conclusion, this may as well be the most overhated one. Personally, for the shortened version without all the celebrities, it could go to an A tier, but I guess I need to account for the full unedited version, which is like 50 minutes. Unfortunately, all that celebrity stuff really drags it down. Well, it kinda sucks, but if we only think about the unedited version, it's still far from being the worst thing. Not gonna lie, I like this episode. Yes, it mostly takes place in one place, and there are some scenes that drag a bit too long, like the beginning, and when SpongeBob is mentioning all those activities, they give me kinda it's so dumb, it's funny vibes. What I like the most is the atmosphere they created. It's really cozy when lights are out and the only source of light are candles, and it's just so dark and all. And I guess they really put enough to this episode to keep you invested and engaged. It still has a lot of great moments and jokes. The ending scene with them just going crazy was pretty awesome too. It lands in A tier. As I said, there's a lot to enjoy. And we get yet another Plankton-themed episode. So many of them in short amount of time. What is going on? And honestly, this one is my favorite out of the bunch. I can say for sure it could fit right into season 5 with all this positive energy, which means I can safely put it in the S tier. Again, seeing Plankton succeed is a huge plus, and I love the overall setting in the cave. And I also enjoyed the latter part of the episode, when it all becomes a competition between him and Mr. Krabs. One thing I don't particularly like is how Plankton is literally whipping all those poor innocent cave creatures. But he doesn't do that too many times. And we can also see at the very end the creatures doing this to him as well. I can clearly see why this episode is disliked, and I'm gonna be honest, I don't think I can defend it really. There are so many problems. Let's start with the characters. Pretty much everybody here act just so dumb and unlikable. Characters are just much more stupider than usual. Everybody. And that is jarring. My next problem is that we have this problem at all. Who cares about father-son problems in a royal family and their backstories? It also bothers me how a royal family comes to the Krusty Krab. It's like in the real world, a royal family would just go to a local McDonald's. Also, this episode is kinda dull and uninteresting in general. And for these reasons, the highest it can go is C tier. Now, let me tell you why it doesn't go to the D tier. There are still some funny jokes and moments in this episode, like SpongeBob mentioning Triton's name repeatedly, SpongeBob's close-up face, Patrick solving the padlock, Triton rampaging, SpongeBob and Patrick sneaking up to Triton honking just when Squidward wanted to play his clarinet, and King Neptune saying, "Flying through the roof?" But yeah, I agree, this episode is pretty terrible. Okay, so this is the first season of the Dark Ages done. Let's take a look at the numbers. So we have 14 episodes in S tier, which is 29.8%, 18 episodes in A tier, which is 38.3%, 7 episodes in B tier, which is 14.9%, 3 episodes in C tier, which is 6.8%, and 5 episodes in D tier, which is 10.6%. The maximum available score for this season was 235, and season 6 score is 174. Which is 74%, which means season 6 goes to a low A tier. As we can see, yes, the ratings are different than the previous ones. However, if we only take a look at the S and A tiers, 2/3 of the season is still good, which means it is still really enjoyable, just like seasons 4 and 5. So I guess it proves that season 6 is not really that terrible. But of course, I know there are more of these not so good episodes, but people should stop thinking like this is the worst thing in the world and avoid it like a fire. This is not that unwatchable garbage season. It's way too overhated. Well, if you are not a fan of this gross-out humor here, then okay, I can understand this. But still, season 6 should be given a chance. Yes, that overall feel is different than the previous seasons, but that's okay. This is normal. Every season is supposed to be different. Besides, some episodes really felt like a continuation of season 5, and that's a very good thing. Also, side note, I was kinda getting sick of that track that played throughout the season. It is called Goofy Conversation Continued. I was slowly getting crazy from listening to it over and over in every episode. I don't think it's a bad track, it's just way too overused. Well, that's it for season 6. Let's see how things go in season 7. Alright, so season 7 of SpongeBob SquarePants. It seems like this one is more liked by the general public than season 6, and I can see why. Season 6 had all that grossness in its episodes, while here Season 7 has much different style, it's much milder. But that mildness will take over in like halfway through the season. Whether you loved Season 6 or hate it, you gotta admit that it was pretty dynamic and relatively fast-paced. Even the worst episodes had a lot going on in them. While in Season 7, it seems like the pace is gradually slowing down. And it's really apparent in like the exact middle of the season, right after the Scent of Money. I have no idea what went wrong, why they decided to do it. I can't really imagine SpongeBob having money issues, so they probably could afford the animation, but decided not to. I really have no idea. However, I'm only gonna mention that slow pace if it's really an issue, because some episodes, despite that flaw, are still really good. Quick reminder of my tiering system, and we can jump right into Season 7. This will probably sound controversial, but I enjoy this episode a lot. Let's start with the fact that this episode kinda starts like House Fancy from the last season, but here it is just much funnier. As always, I'm really happy for Squidward for achieving something, and him being in a good humor in general. Then we obviously have what most of people will probably consider as a problem, everyone ruining Squidward's show, but it's actually not a problem. You will know from the very beginning that Squidward will not succeed at this. And the episode was clearly made to be just joking around. And honestly, it's all hilarious. Like, they put so many funny jokes and situations here. And it got even funnier when like Mr. Krabs stepped in and started dancing and advertising Krusty Krab, as well as every other person. It goes to the S tier naturally. It's really funny. So we get another music-themed episode. And it was clearly made to just show off more of the dancing montages instead of having an actual plot. And I must say, yeah, it's alright, not necessarily my favorite. He becomes his teacher, pretty much like in Slimy Dancing, and I must say it's all just okay. I don't really want to say I don't care about all this, but it feels like it does get boring at times. Episode goes into the B tier. It's not terrible by any means, it's just not amazing or anything, it's just okay. This episode is a little weird, but in a positive way. Pearl growing to be this huge version of herself is a bit strange, but I guess it does help with saying that there are some high stakes. I enjoy that Mr. Krabs wants to help Pearl and literally steals food from other characters. I find all the montages with him to be enjoyable. I think the episode deserves an A tier. It's honestly fun to watch, but there are some moments that are a bit strange, like the ending. And as I said, Pearl looks very uncomfortable. And why is Mrs. Puff growing pets? And they're spitting goo just like those worms from Pet or Pests were doing. But at least the episode takes place at night, so it gets bonus points. This episode is a miles better version and execution of the Splinter idea. It's not as gross and painful, and SpongeBob has more screen time to adapt to this new life. And this is what should have been done with the Splinter. That's already a plus for the episode. It makes sense that SpongeBob won't do everything exactly as he used to do, and will cause some trouble with that whole contraption on, but he should be understood instead of being yelled at. That's a massive minus. More of the episode's screen time should have been about removing that ringer, or at least trying to remove it. Nice for Patrick for trying to cheer SpongeBob up, even though he is still dumb and oblivious, but it's also cute that he regrets what he's done and wants his friend back. That's also a plus. I just feel bad for SpongeBob. He gets angry at Patrick, but he's right, because he's the one who put him in this situation. So another plus for calling him out. And all the people around them, well, they have only seen that one fight, they don't know the entire context between SpongeBob's situation, but they still shouldn't act like SpongeBob has deserved all of this. Instead, they should just mind their own business. They are all essentially wrong and SpongeBob is being misunderstood again. Which ultimately gives a bad moral for this episode. I'll put this episode in B tier. It has all these bad stuff, but we shouldn't forget all the good bits about the episode. Like the general idea, which I actually like. Plus there are some good jokes anyway. This episode is way overhated. And the moral at the very end, well, it's pretty obvious that it was meant to be silly. So we get another plot of Plankton disguising himself as somebody to get the formula. And this one feels like it belongs in Season 6 really. But most of the time, a beginning of a season feels like an extension to the last season, and it's clearly the case here. I get what they were trying to do, but characters do feel a bit stupid for just not noticing it's Plankton controlling Sandy's fur. And for me personally, that's the biggest problem of the episode. I'm also not a fan of all the people making fun and fighting poor Sandy, and the scenes in the kitchen are just more dumb than funny. This episode lands in the D tier. It's not the worst D tier thing in the show. The ending fight is pretty cool, but majority of the episode is pretty dull. So we get another plot of Plankton going inside someone's body back to back. But unlike the previous one, this one is like my favorite of the season, which is no surprise it goes in the S tier. The beginning is kinda amusing, but what is really funny is how Plankton fails to get the formula by using SpongeBob's senses. And SpongeBob trying to work like that anyway. It really is hilarious. But the episode keeps getting better. I love the inside of SpongeBob's brain, how Plankton slowly turns into him and then into Patrick later in the episode. It's all just awesome. I was surprised upon rewatching Greasy Buffoons. It used to bore me back in the day, but it turns out it's actually much better than I remember. I honestly enjoy the competition between Plankton and Krabs, and the grease is an interesting plot point. And again, it's nice to see Chumbucket doing well. I'm putting this one into A tier. It's a nice competition, and it makes sense that the grease will affect everybody negatively, and how the grease itself becomes a bigger and bigger issue with the progression of the episode. And also that SpongeBob realizes that and cleans it up. I really enjoyed the plot of Model Sponge. The misunderstanding at the very beginning is kinda funny. It's also kinda funny how SpongeBob panics and he tries to prove that he's taller than Squidward. And it's neat to see him try different jobs, but it's a bit bothersome that all he can make is Krabby Patties. But it's really hilarious when we find out that he's gonna act in a sponge commercial. Because he is a sponge, so it all makes sense. This episode goes in the A tier. It's pretty funny, I know, but I guess the pacing is a bit slow at times. And they could have thrown more into this episode, but that's not a big issue. Why are people hating this one? I guess the repetitive cop joke is a bit jarring, but it was meant to be humorous. He is a bit funny and doesn't really appear that many times. Not the worst running gag. I guess the episode has a good premise. You really should keep things clean and tidy and not litter. It's nice for SpongeBob to help Squidward. The scene with him living in the trash house is hilarious, and overall Squidward kinda wins with Squilliam at the end. The episode lands in the B tier. It's obviously far from amazing, but also far from terrible. What can I say about this? First part isn't bad at all, and the second part, well, definitely not as good as the first. Let's start with the good stuff. It's good to see SpongeBob feeling bad for Gary and leaving him alone, even though he has a good time being alone at home, which is also cool to see. And it's a good idea to bring another pet to the home, so the first pet will have a buddy to play with. I honestly like that monster design and the rampage he's causing, and that at the very end Gary was the one who defeated him, despite all odds. And visually the whole scene is great. And for the problems of the episode, well, the main problem is SpongeBob. How he is all of a sudden very oblivious to what's happening to Gary, despite caring for him so much in the first half. Which obviously doesn't make sense and it's really stupid. And then seeing Gary being so scared of this monster is just heartbreaking. And honestly, those problems really outweigh the good stuff. So it lands in the C tier. The positives of this episode are still there, but yeah, they are being overshadowed by the problems. Yours, mine and mine. Actually, this episode is pretty flawed. I must say it's mostly because of Patrick. He becomes so unhealthy attached to the Krabby Patty toy. In the entire episode, he is pretty mean and unlikable. And the entire episode is just him being that way. He creates unnecessary conflicts with SpongeBob and, not gonna lie, it gets frustrating. Episode lands in the C tier. Despite all the problems, it does have some good moments and a few funny scenes, like them two fighting in the second half is pretty awesome. Okay, now this episode is really hilarious. All these little cheapskate jokes pile up and get me every time. And all the examples they show in the episode are pretty fun as well. Also, SpongeBob's scene on the stage is also really funny. There's nothing really more to this episode. It goes to the S tier. The whole thing is just cheapskate jokes. It's pretty simple, yet it works. I start to get worried that we don't really get much S tier episodes this season so far. And we get another simple premise that gets really well executed. I enjoy watching their shenanigans as ghosts, what abilities they now have and what they struggle with. Beginning montage and the setup are pretty funny, and how they are trying to help Flying Dutchman is also wholesome, and they succeed. You could argue that the pacing of the episode is a bit slow, but that's not really an issue here. And the joke about Squidward's life is hilarious. I think it can go to a low S tier. There is honestly a lot to like. We get another pretty amazing episode, and let's be honest, it's all because of that wondrous land of Clarinet Land. All the visuals there and the whole sequence actually is pretty amazing. The only problem is that the setup takes too long. But I also guess that too much time spent in the Clarinet Land wouldn't be good as well, so maybe we got a perfect balance after all. Besides, we get some funny moments and jokes in the setup anyway, so that's not really a problem. I think it deserves an S tier. The whole episode is enjoyable and the bizarre world of the locker is awesome. I'm not sure what to think about this episode. I guess it's okay. It's focused on giving a message about protecting the environment and that the industrialism and building roads is bad for the environment. Don't get me wrong, I think it is a good message about protecting it, but we shouldn't get too radical and like against all of this really, as sometimes we actually need a road to go somewhere. It's for our own convenience and shortcuts. If some environment is sacrificed at one spot to build a road, then it can be safe in another one. Besides, roads and environment can go together, as well as an old road can always be removed, so there's less car fumes and all of this in a particular place. Unfortunately, the roads are necessary in the society, but they're just like season 6 to 8. They're not that bad. So the episode isn't exactly right of exaggerating the problem of the highway. It raises awareness, so that's great. And the episode itself has some good musical scores and funny joke and that apocalyptic tone that I dig. It goes in the A tier. Whether you think the message is good or not, you gotta admit there's a lot to love about this episode. I love time travel concepts and alternate universes and going to the past and changing something so it changes the future. That kind of stuff. So this episode had me hooked immediately. I do agree Patrick acts a bit too dumb, but thanks to him we get more enjoyable conflicts. And honestly, I love that this episode is a bit longer so we can get more shenanigans. And pretty much everything is done correctly. We get some darker humor with Mermaid Man and Barnacle actually dying, and the ending with all these paradoxes and clones coming together is pretty funny as well. And Man Ray is a good villain too. Honestly, the episode can go to a low S tier, mostly because of the awesome concept and all the good stuff there. This episode is just an episode within an episode. I feel like I say the word episode way too many times. But yeah, this one is literally just SpongeBob and Patrick watching a lost episode of Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy. That is stylized to be like from the 60s or something. It's just cool. I like this episode. Nothing really amazing, but it can go to an A tier. It has a good moral that you should read books, but what doesn't make sense is, in this episode of Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy, all the main characters are being introduced as well as the villains. It seems like a big deal, so how an episode like that could get lost? Okay, so at this point, which of my opinions are not controversial? But hey, this is why I made this video, remember? So yeah, I like this episode a lot. People just say, it's just SpongeBob crying, obnoxious, but that's the whole premise of the episode. We needed a setup that will involve a lot of crying, but it works. Without it, we wouldn't have the latter part, which is pretty good as well. And in general, I think we just needed an episode about crying and trying not to cry. That acknowledges that SpongeBob is a massive crier. It's pretty hilarious that Squidward tries to make SpongeBob cry and he fails. SpongeBob actually wins, kinda. At the end we get a literal flood, but it isn't too obnoxious or anything. It's obvious that it was all made to be humorous. I'll put it into S tier, mainly for the premise and it's decently executed. This episode is another of those role reversal, role reversal, role reversal, role reversal, role reversal. No matter how hard I try, I just can't say it. But yeah, it's that kind of episode. Usually Mrs. Puff teaches SpongeBob, now SpongeBob is teaching her. It's alright, I honestly like seeing characters trying new stuff and different jobs. SpongeBob does get a bit annoying, but it's within his character. It's nice for him to teach her, and the ending is really hilarious. And in general, it's a pretty nice watch. I think it's A tier. It is understandable that Mrs. Puff gets a little bit pissed at SpongeBob, but that's also not like outside her character yet. Little foreshadowing. What do you think? Overrated or not? Makes sense that Plankton would be scared of Pearl. Whales eat plankton in real life, so at least his fear is justified. He even says what happened to his ancestors. I can understand why crabs would like to scare Plankton a little bit, given how they are rivals and all, but I agree he definitely went way too far here. Mental trauma and paranoias are not fun. And being in that state for 2 weeks is just horrible. Plankton just wants to end this all. So yeah, crabs went miles and miles too far. Only because SpongeBob said where the safe is. Mr. Crab could just put the secret formula somewhere else. What's the problem? Actually, yeah, this isn't going to any higher tier, but it can reside in C tier. Despite all the wrongs, the beginning sequence is pretty cool. SpongeBob realizing Krabs is doing wrong and helping Plankton is also pretty cute. Pearl is against the idea of scaring him really, and Krabs also deserved being scared too. Overall, it's not good, but it's definitely overhated. Love episode. What? I don't like it. Having a crush is just dumb. You can't think clearly, and personally I had way too many problems with that. So the highest it can go is C. Despite the crush, it's nice to see SpongeBob care about Gary and being worried, and those bully snails are kinda cool, so there it is. Also melodrama. This episode is kinda fun. It reminds me of Tentacle Vision. Squidward is doing something big only to get really ignored. And what made Tentacle Vision so funny is at least partially here. Squidward being so dramatic is kinda hilarious. The episode can definitely go into A tier. The setup takes a bit too long and it gets a bit boring, but the whole second half makes up for it. Even SpongeBob scenes weren't that annoying or anything. And the ending was pretty fun too. I used not to like this episode that much, but it grew up on me. Same with this one. It's really similar to the previous one with the structure. By that I mean the setup takes way too long and it's like 2 minutes before anything happens. The beginning song is catchy. I think it's cute for SpongeBob to be worried for Sandy. And I don't know why, but all the characters rejecting SpongeBob is kind of funny. But the highlight of the episode is definitely the night montage, with SpongeBob gathering everybody in the bubbles and Queen Aloha OEC is playing in the background. It's almost magical. But then we get the ending that just looks super rushed and has horrible CGI. This and the pointless beginning are like 2 major problems of this episode. Everything else is fine. A tier sounds fair enough. This episode is fine, just kinda dull. Like, it's not bad. It's kind of funny to see Plankton going through all of this with SpongeBob. But in my opinion, slow pacing kinda affects that one really. Fake out scene was bizarre, but at least Plankton almost got what he wanted. But then the actual grandma just pops out of nowhere and stopped him. Pretty random, and it would be jarring if I really cared about this episode. It's B tier, like there's nothing horrible here, and I guess there is some tension, like will Plankton make it? It's mildly interesting at least. So that will be a surprise probably. I really think this episode is done correctly. Apparently Gary has that superpower of money getting attracted to him. Makes sense that Mr. Krabs would like to abuse this power. And he does, it's really well made. I enjoy him just getting all this money from all possible places. And stalling SpongeBob is a really cool idea. He needs to keep him distracted for a while. At the climax at the arcade store is great. It's really nice to see Mr. Krabs getting his comeuppance at the end. Yes, I am putting this one in S tier. It's another one of those that became funnier after rewatching. And yeah, I can buy that Gary ate a magnet and it's so strong it attracts coins. Obviously it's exaggerated, but for a cartoon episode it works. Okay, so as I said earlier, I'm gonna point out that the really slow pace starts here. And I'm only gonna critique that if it's really an issue. And it's immediately an issue. I gotta admit, the interactions between SpongeBob, Patrick and the monster are kinda cute and wholesome. The monster starting to rampage was actually really funny. It is a monster after all, that can talk. Patrick defending him was really adorable, and the ending was pretty sad. There's a lot of good things in this episode, but the time is wasted on that slow pace. There's that long opening scene, and then they're at SpongeBob's house, and then they're chasing the monster, and that's the end. So the good balances out with the bad to about a B tier. This episode is awesome though. I love when a main cast of a show gets transported to a different location and there are mysteries and stuff. The lore of Bikini Bottom Triangle and how it works and all that is really amazing. And so are the backgrounds, there's like so much detail in this. Credit to the background artist for all these details. Honestly, you can go to the S tier. I also like that almost the entire main cast gets involved into this. Another one with good premise, but also the pacing is just so slow. We don't get the main plot of the episode until like halfway through. And it's not even like in, for example, Toy Story of Doom, where in the first half of the episode there was something going on and it was energetic. Here we barely get anything. And the setup should have been like 2 minutes, but instead it's like really stretched. The pace is incredibly slow. And the episode just gets boring mostly. The individual things, however, are okay. The idea of laying a curse, a lady that can lay curses, I really felt bad for that lady at the beginning. Nice for SpongeBob for trying to help her. And the scene at the cave with the monster was also pretty awesome. So I guess, again, there is good mixed with bad, so it all balances out to a B tier. It should have been a 7-minute episode and the previous one a 14-minute episode. So here we get another mystery as well as another adventure. And they do a pretty good job in my opinion. Honestly, this episode is pretty funny. Despite, you know, also being kinda slow. And we literally get the same scene like 3 times. The idea of that main drain is stupid funny. I'll put it in A tier. I genuinely enjoy that little adventure SpongeBob and Patrick have. Alright, so finally in those Legends of Bikini Bottom, we get more screen time of whatever they wanted to have here in this miniseries. I'm actually glad that we got a lot of visuals for that new place and characters. Granted, there's a lot of stereotypes in those characters. They managed to make them decently funny. I enjoy all these little competitions they have. The setup didn't take long and it made sense, and the ending wasn't the worst either. It can be an A tier, mostly because of that unique setting. And I kinda like all the designs. Squidward is pretty much how I feel at work. It is so relatable here. I just love how Squidward calls everybody out, and the setup for his sacrifice is perfect. Let's ignore the fact that that volcano just appeared out of nowhere. I love the apocalypse it is causing, although that shelter doesn't look safe at all. Also, I love that general paranoia going on. This is an S tier episode. It is really weird in a positive way. The scene of Squidward being sacrificed is awesome. And I guess it also teaches a good moral. You should be grateful for what you have in life. You can lose it. Also like that dolphin, and the solution to the problem is pretty funny. SpongeBob's song at the beginning is okay, but I am not a fan. The Great Patty Caper. Well, it is adventurous at all. It has that solving mystery plot, but it also just feels like it's stretched out. Well, I doubt an 11-minute version of this episode will work. Maybe 14 minutes would be a perfect balance, because honestly, as it is, it does keep you involved, but it also gets a bit boring at times. Mainly in the first half. Obviously, there's still a lot of good here. Pretty much the whole second part is pretty energetic, with them trying to save the whole situation. And I understand they tried to make the first half a bit more dramatic and a bit like it's a big deal, but why? Why did they have to hide the formula so far away from the Krusty Krab? Plankton never got the formula even when it was in the Krusty Krab, so why bother? Honestly, I'm putting it into B tier. There's a lot of good and it's pretty well executed. It feels kinda uninteresting in the first half, and as I said, the whole premise is kinda unnecessary. It feels like a lot more could have been put in this special. So this episode is pretty much like Slide Whistle Studios. Even the music is back. And just like in that one, it wasn't meant to have a deep plot or anything, but to rather just have a good time vibing to the music and to the energy of this episode. And when Slide Whistle Studios plays, it's really fun. But it all starts in like a second quarter of this episode. Unfortunately, again, the setup takes way too long. And it's more annoying than anything. And there's a bit of that in the latter parts as well. But I guess all the fun parts balance it out. So I guess it's like B tier. This one is simple but really fun. It's just really funny to see Patrick walking around with karate abilities. SpongeBob teaching him is awesome, but my favorite part is him just going on a rampage. And the ending when he thought he injured SpongeBob was really wholesome. And that's really it. I think it's S tier. It's just Patrick having fun. I also love that dark joke when he almost chopped a baby. Buried in Time is awesome as well. I love that concept. I must say, again, the setup takes a bit too long, and because of it, they didn't really put as much as they could into the most important part of the episode. But honestly, it's not that bad. Once they actually get inside the time capsule, it's really nice to see their thoughts and visions of what the future may look like. But if you think about it, the whole concept is really dark. They wouldn't even survive one day in the capsule, let alone 50 years. But I guess it's also really funny when they think the 50 years actually passed. It's S tier. And I also guess the ending gag with Plankton is actually kinda clever. After he gets stepped on with a bottle, I guess the gag makes sense and it's actually quite unique. As well as how can't you not love Enchanted Tiki Dreams? An episode where SpongeBob and Patrick actually realized they made Squidward miserable and genuinely tried to make him happy. Well, first we must go through that annoying setup, but we needed a setup and it doesn't drag for too long. We all love this episode for the second half. It's S tier. We can just all relax with Squidward and the beautiful Hawaiian music and Hawaiian backgrounds. It's all good, but I really wish that setup was a bit shorter so we can have more time in the Tiki Land. Also the ending, yeah, I'm really happy that they still try to maintain Squidward's good mood. What is with those long setups this season? Again, the proper good stuff starts like midway of this episode. I know we need setups, but they don't have to take so much time. But okay, that one isn't really that bad. The main star of the episode is the abrasive side and it's honestly amazing. It shows that one part of us that all of us wants to be at some point to others. And it teaches a good moral that we shouldn't really be that mean person, even if we really want to. And besides this, the episode is obviously filled with hilarious interactions between characters and a lot of great jokes. It is an S tier episode, it just makes sense and everything works here. And another episode I really enjoy. Man, it took them so long to make a bunch of S tier episodes in season 7. We've got 5 in a row, and it's again somewhat relatable. How many times we have had a song stuck in our heads? Not taken to an extreme like here in SpongeBob, but still, we sometimes can forget stuff just because a song plays in our head, and the song itself is really catchy. I like how it plays in the episode. I also love the madness SpongeBob is slowly going into, and the solution with trying different songs was really clever, and I honestly love it. This episode is like a slightly better version of one of the awful episodes we're gonna have in a bit, You Don't Know Sponge. At least here there's a lot more going on. And it's more interesting, especially later when SpongeBob starts looking for Patrick around the area. The ending with Patrick not star is kinda cool, and the very end is pretty wholesome. And that's pretty much all the good stuff here. The whole setup and the majority of the episode is just so slow and boring. Until that aforementioned halfway point of the episode, when SpongeBob starts looking around the town. It's a C tier episode. The latter parts really save it from the D tier. Okay, so blah blah blah, long setup, it's all mildly interesting. The main plot starts like in the middle. You are probably all sick of me saying this. The first part is eh. Second part is where it gets better. I really liked all the situations Plankton finds himself in. Especially that little pill was really hilarious. And there's honestly not much wrong. Overall, it's just a B tier episode. It's like harmless. It's just really affected by that season 7-ness. It is like the most season 7 episode out there. Although one more positive thing is how SpongeBob actually cares for Gary. I mean, Gary, because that's actually Plankton. So here the setup isn't actually long, it's the title that's kinda misleading. Because we don't really get to know any idea about a masterpiece until, you guessed it, in the middle of the episode. But honestly, both parts, the first half and the second half, are interesting in their own ways. In the second part, where they actually create and critique the masterpiece, there's a lot more going on and it's amusing. That doesn't mean the first part isn't good or anything, it's also okay. It's just B tier, it's like middle of the road, it's okay. See? If season 7 wants to have a dynamic plot, it can have it. Honestly, this episode is really awesome. All the citizens are in real danger and they are scared of whelks. There's a lot of action and high stakes. I like how they actually find out what the problem is and how SpongeBob and his absorbing powers save the day. I am really glad they set it up earlier. It's an easy S tier. I'm actually surprised how many episodes in the latter part of season 7 are really good. Well, except for the next one. Okay, so this might be the worst episode ever created. Talk about slow pace. This episode, literally nothing is going on. SpongeBob and Patrick just stand in the kitchen for the most part, asking questions about themselves and answering them, but it just takes so long and it's just so frustrating. Like, it literally takes over half of the episode. Some of the answers from Patrick made me chuckle a bit, but it doesn't matter. For like 6 minutes you are falling asleep, and then they make a conflict, or at least try to make one. Patrick is unbearable, so oblivious, and overall a big jerk. The rest of the episode is pretty dumb as well. I understand SpongeBob's crying, at least for the context of this episode, but it makes Patrick even worse. And also the ending just drags on forever, and the resolution also feels just pretty random. I get that they tried to make it heartwarming, but good luck surviving to the end of the episode. I really just don't care, it's D tier. I really dislike this episode, as you have probably noticed by now. It's boring and I just cannot defend it. So it's obviously not a true love team episode. More like just teenagers making fun of each other, kinda love. But it's mostly just SpongeBob and Pearl being inside that tunnel. And I must say, these visuals are really nice. I also love how it's all synchronized with Patrick. While trying to look for SpongeBob, he messes everything up. And it's actually hilarious. His stupidity is definitely on the funny side here. And as I mentioned, everything he causes in the tunnel looks really fantastic. It was a good candidate for an S tier episode, but honestly it's gonna land in A. Pearl is a bit too mean to SpongeBob, as well as her friends, and again there is some slow pacing here and there. Unfortunately, we get another cool idea, but the pacing of... How many times have I mentioned the pacing by now? The pacing of the episode hinders it a lot. It's a nice idea of a new menu product to get popularity, and I like how they try to make it all dramatic and stuff. Again, it feels like they could have put a lot more to this one. But still, what we've got is not that bad. SpongeBob trying to make Krusty Dogs look terrible was really funny. And as I said, I enjoy the drama. It's B tier, it's like middle of the road. Not bad, not good. Krusty Dogs could be in the menu alongside Krabby Patties, so there was no reason to remove them entirely. Okay, so now we get a much more interesting episode. Interesting concept, really good setting in the cave. It reminds me of those childhood secrets we had and secret places we went to with friends to play in. I have been doing that for some time in primary school. And I kinda like Mr. Krabs. He is within his character. Makes sense that he would like to have all those treasures for himself. And obviously SpongeBob and Patrick didn't keep any of this a secret. The twist of it being an amusement park is a decent twist. I like how they tried to make it an usable ride, and that they failed and got punished. I think it can be an A tier. There's much more to like about it than I remembered. This episode is pretty dull. I get the idea they tried to make, but it all feels like it's just the end of the season, so they just had to come up with anything just to fill the space. Unfortunately, just another one that just drags and it's kinda there. There are still positives here though. I'm very happy for Squidward and that he has a soulmate and has good time with him. Also, Squidward trying to repel SpongeBob and Patrick was really funny as well. But besides that, as I said, things get slow a bit. And I don't really like how Harold just suddenly changed his mind. But Squidward literally getting rid of him was hilarious. And it's nice that they try to cheer Squidward up at the very end. Overall, I think there's enough funny stuff to bring it up to a B tier. So that's also kinda about love, not really. First off, I'm really happy for Squidward that has a genuine crush. Also love how supportive SpongeBob is and how he prepared that practice date. It's also kinda fun. Some bits could have been annoying, but they aren't really. This episode in general has a good atmosphere. I also love how Squidward calls SpongeBob out, only to turn out that's actually a good thing. I think it deserves an A. They are doing a lot of stuff good and there's very little bad things. Again, it's nice to have another happy Squidward episode. This episode doesn't need to exist at all. Sam is one of the most annoying and unlikable characters ever. It honestly feels like they didn't have any idea for second to last episode of the season, so they picked a bad stock plot. A sibling that is just unbearable and aggressive and pretty dumb and just ruins everybody's day. Seriously, both Squidward and SpongeBob suffer in this episode, just for the sake of it. Even Patrick becomes more annoying and unlikable here, and it's really oblivious to what Sam is doing. It's a D tier episode. As we all know, Patrick did once mention that he doesn't have a sister, and I know SpongeBob sucks with continuity, but that's like the one thing they should have kept. But whatever. They even tried to make a cute and wholesome ending, but it doesn't work. Again, I think this episode shouldn't really exist. I just cannot defend it. This is a collab between characters we needed for a long time. Sandy and Plankton. I honestly love how they share their scientific sides here. Granted, Plankton still only wants to take the formula, but he's doing that pretty well with Sandy's help. I kinda feel bad for SpongeBob here. He is kinda being left behind. but it's nice for them to give him at least a test monkey job. The teleporting sequences are really cool, but they do get a kinda repetitive. I'm not really a fan of those fart jokes, but I like how the teleporting gear gets more ridiculous. Overall, I think it's an A-tier episode. Alright, another season from the dark era is complete. Let's take a look at the numbers. So we have got 16 episodes in the S tier, which is 32%, 14 episodes in A tier, which is 28%, 12 episodes in B tier, which is 25%, 5 episodes in C tier, which is 10%, and 3 episodes in the D tier, which is 6%. The maximum available score for Season 7 was 250 points, and Season 7 scored 185, which is 74%, which makes it go to a low A tier, which is actually the same as Season 6. Wow! Have I calculated it correctly? Looks like it. That's weird, but since Season 7 isn't as dynamic as Season 6 was, I'm gonna say it's the worst one of these two. I was honestly hoping it's gonna score much less. But hey, that's the statistics for you. But honestly, I think it's pretty neat how two seasons scored exactly the same, but their numbers are vastly different. It's a very good example of how statistics, numbers and charts are a double-edged sword. Final thoughts? Not many. As I mentioned multiple times, the pacing in Season 7 really slowed down at the halfway point, and it felt much different than the rest. But even then, they still managed to make some banger episodes. Honestly, the whole season is just Most of the episodes had just that feeling. They are there, not the worst on their own, but compared to the previous seasons, yeah, I agree, they are much inferior. They are just except for the S tier episodes and some A tiers. I don't really care about this season as much. But if you don't like Season 6, you may think this is slightly better. I think the opposite. Season 7 is a good candidate to be statistically the worst season, but we still have a lot more, so let's not get too ahead of ourselves. See you everybody in Season 8. So we have seen how Season 6 and 7 aren't as bad as people are making them to be. But Season 8 is probably the most critically underrated of all of them. And it's down to one thing I call Season 8 charm. And it's a combination of many different stuff. It mostly feels like what Season 7 failed to achieve, with filling the episodes throughout with many different stuff. Despite still having some pacing issues, you can see they try to fill the episodes with fresh and unique ideas. It makes that weird combination of trying to be dynamic, but at the same time having that slow-paced animation. And that's basically the main reason behind that Season 8 charm. Like, seriously, in some scenes, the animation is so laughably slow that it shouldn't be. And I really don't understand how a show that makes so much money could make such slow-paced animation. But I personally really enjoy it. People just love to slap that laziness label on it, which is a crime. If you truly take a look at Season 8, you will realize that it is one of the most diverse seasons out there. A lot of locations, gags, plots, characters. I even have a feeling that this season is just more colorful. And it's such a shame people don't talk about it. Even what people are considering to be bad episodes are full of good bits. It's like the creators knew that season is a different style than all the others, so they were just like, anything goes. They definitely didn't play it safe and just let the imagination flow. So yeah, I think Season 8 is pretty fun. Of course, if an episode will be boring and slow pacing will be an issue, I'm gonna mention it and critique, which there are few of them. So quick reminder of the tiering system, and let's jump into Season 8. Unfortunately, we are blasted with a slow-paced episode right away. But don't worry, some funny dialogues and jokes are to the rescue. I can immediately say this episode is B tier. As I said, you can feel the pacing here and some of the scenes drag a bit too long. Squidward is kinda unlikable here, but at least Mr. Krabs is funny. I like that little investigation SpongeBob and Patrick have. Squidward's story is hilarious and overall there are some jokes. I guess it all balances out. The other Patty, on the other hand, it's another slow pacer, but it feels like it's even slower. It feels like it takes forever for anything to happen. even though we get a cool concept of Mr. Krabs and Plankton working together and having a mutual enemy, so to speak. And a lot of the ideas are pretty interesting. It's a nice little adventure sprinkled with Season 8 charm. And you are actually invested in what is going to happen. Actually, I just realized I can't really compare it to Accidents Will Happen, as here there's a lot more going on. I think it should land in A tier. It's not terrible, it has good moments, despite having that slow pace. I know we had those team-up episodes earlier, but every Krabs Plankton team-up episode is good in my book. Drive-thru, however, it's a banger. Let's ignore the fact that Krusty Krab has wooden walls instead of glass. It works for this episode because that's the only way it can make sense. Now it's really funny to see an energetic episode in Season 8 because of the charm and slow pacing and blah blah blah, as I said, but for me it's a positive thing. The episode is filled with great character interactions and dialogues. Again, it's all energetic and fun, and there's a lot of destruction. It's S tier. The Hot Shot, it's a pretty cool episode. Good to see SpongeBob have a buddy who can legitimately teach him and overcome his fears and build confidence. And it's cool in general to have a character that everybody adores. Even Mrs. Puff is happy, which is great to see. The inside of Tony's house is pretty cool as well. Same with that whole race sequence. Overall, I think it's A tier. It's a good episode, but it feels like something more could have been put into it. A Friendly Game is just an episode about mini golf. That's literally it. It's just mini golf. I agree, they definitely tried to put a lot of interesting visuals into it to make it more interesting, but I don't really care. They tried to make it a lot of fun and even create conflicts later on, but then we get just a destruction of Squidward's house just because Patrick is dumb. I don't know, people. I'm putting this one in C tier. Like, if you enjoy it, that's fine. It just doesn't click for me. Now this episode definitely does, it's so relatable for me, given that I'm also a pretty sentimental person. I love gathering memories and not getting rid of them. They are all special. Like, I don't even like to throw away all the dirt I collect in Minecraft. Obviously, SpongeBob takes it to an absolute extreme, but honestly, I just love that. And how the situation gradually gets more and more out of control. SpongeBob being attached to all that trash is somewhat sweet. And the ending is also pretty funny. S tier. We have the first of the many special, and that one is excellent. We have two plots. First is the winter race, and the other is Plankton trying to steal the formula. And both of them are great. We have a lot of high stakes in the race. It's all a great adventure. There is danger, that giant monster is chasing them, risk of freezing, problem solving, cooperation. Basically, it all turns into a survival. And it's really awesome. And all Plankton's sequences of trying to break into the safe are really hilarious. I especially love him literally breaking apart the atoms. And it all ties together into a nice chase at the ending. And it's also cool to see the monster helping. It's an S tier episode, a brilliant special, and there is almost zero to dislike. Maybe besides Plankton abandoning Karen, and the frame rate of the monster is kinda jarring to me. Okay, so hear me out. That's probably gonna not surprise anybody, but I think the boat screaming at the beginning of the episode is hilarious. It just gets me every time. It's so stupid, and that's what makes it hilarious. Am I really that immature? It's like they just didn't care and are not afraid of putting that kind of stuff in the episode. And that's what makes it extra amusing. But besides that, I'm really also a fan of Squidward teaching Patrick how to be a grown-up, and Patrick actually being that grown-up. I enjoy all these locations and stuff they are doing. SpongeBob might be slightly annoying, but it's not too bad. But I like the ending at the opera and how all the problems are solved. I'm putting this one in S tier. I honestly love it. And Squidward makes that face again. This episode is fine. It's also relatable. How many times I had to say something in front of people and I was paralyzed from stress. And it's really cute for all the characters of trying to help SpongeBob with his problem. This episode gets an A. The chase and SpongeBob's speech are the best parts of the episode. There's a lot of funny dialogue here and there. The beginning is cool too. Major thing that drags this episode down is Patrick being just annoying. And a nitpick, the cars here look really slow, which is kind of funny but really jarring. We get Squidward and Plankton team up next, which is pretty rare, so it's awesome every time we can see it. And it's really funny to see Plankton not being able to convince Squidward at first, but only when he starts talking about music. And it's also funny at the beginning when everybody's just repelled by Squidward's clarinet play, and that tantrum he's showing, it's also really hilarious. But when Plankton and Squidward do get along together finally, they have a good time. Well, partially at least. Obviously Plankton is just pretending, but the song is pretty cool, and how Squidward gets lost in his dreams, it's also really funny. And we get another cool chase at the end. It's S tier, honestly. I'm not bothered by Squidward's bad clarinet play. That is hilarious too. I'm a bit split on Patrick on this episode. On one hand, he's lighthearted and innocent at the beginning, but then he becomes really snarky. And so I guess it all balances out to being just eh. But neither of those two are too annoying. And an episode that more focuses on art is a good thing. The googly creations are kinda amusing, as well as all the art in the episode. Too bad Squidward gets the short end of the stick. But I guess it's nice to see Patrick having some success. It's B tier. It's just okay. I'm pretty split on the vacation special. Right off the bat, I'll mention the biggest problem. It's literally the slow pace. Feels like they just couldn't fit all of the ideas into a 22-minute episode, so they just stretched what they had. It's not like the individual bits are bad or something. Like the hillbilly mechanic, he's really hilarious. It's just his scene drags for too long. Or that playground scene, it's just there. It's cool to see SpongeBob have a good time, but it's like 2 minutes of nothing. The episode gets much more interesting in the second half. I really dig that red jungle. And the songs are fine. It's just another one that's not terrible, but it's not like amazing. It's just kind of B tier in the middle of the road. I'm gonna be honest here, Patrick really behaves horribly. He's like kinda unbearable and unlikable. He obviously doesn't care about what is going on around him. And SpongeBob puts all that effort for nothing. It's a C tier, because I gotta admit, there are some funny moments and gags, but most of the time it's kind of frustrating. I wish I could say Patrick is like funny dumb, but that's not the case here. Although this episode is about stealing the formula, the twist here, they are being on a cruise ship, and that makes it unique. The visuals look great. I like the fact that SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs interact with everything and everybody on the ship and have a good time in general. Same with Karen. Again, despite that being all a Plankton scheme, I love how she splits up the entire ship at the end. I guess it's an A tier. It does take a bit before we get to the cruise ship, but the whole thing is enjoyable. Mooncation is so unique, we literally go to space, more precisely to the moon, and stay there for a good chunk of the episode. A little bit of the beginning and SpongeBob behavior is a bit annoying. The episode makes up for it later on with great moon visuals and crater boarding, and the whole ending sequence with them coming back to Earth is also pretty awesome. I was thinking about putting it into A tier just because the beginning is too long. They should put less bakery scenes and more moon scenes. But I think it's unique enough to be put in the S tier, just barely. Another unique episode with a unique location. That vacation miniseries isn't all that bad. They managed to make an episode about mint interesting, and they put a lot of great visual humor. Mr. Krabs' reactions are brilliant, as well as SpongeBob being his sidekick and reacting to his reactions are very well executed. And if you think about it, the setup doesn't take very long at all, because even though they're driving in a car, driving somewhere in a car is also a part of vacation. And they put funny jokes there too. It's S tier. It's honestly a great underrated episode. This episode is awesome. Let's start with the fact that it mostly takes place at night. All the backgrounds stylized to look like an abandoned building look great, as well as all those small details in the backgrounds. I'm a huge fan of those type of episodes. And honestly, this is a great adventure. It's so nice they made it a special, because you can really feel the Halloween aura. And the songs are pretty good too. I love the void they find themselves in later and at the very end of the episode. And the latter part with the Flying Dutchman is also really cool. In short, I think it has enough good things to be in A tier. It's all a pretty enjoyable watch. Alright, we all love this episode because of the wacky flashbacks, myself included. I find all of them to be hilarious. It's pretty obvious that they were meant to be crazy as possible. And it's a good thing, they really put effort here. It's S tier. The whole setup is pretty good. I love that idea of a storm and power outage. The cave also looked pretty great. It's funny how Mermaid Man really tried to make himself look better in his flashbacks. And as I said, those said flashbacks are like the best part of the episode. I love this episode. Just the idea of Plankton literally injecting SpongeBob DNA to himself and growing a piece of him is hilarious. Not to mention, it's all a side effect of his experiment. Pretty much every sequence here is awesome. The setup at the Krusty Krab, all the failed attempts, getting SpongeBob's DNA, Plankton experiencing being good, and the ending scene being really wholesome. It's S tier. This episode really does everything correctly. I can feel this episode. Trust me, I used to have a lot of acne problems. And while I mostly have all of them sorted out, it's still so relatable and I know what Pearl is going through. Because I myself tried dozens of things to help my condition. It honestly can go to the S tier. Besides SpongeBob helping Pearl, I like Mr. Krabs' underground cellar. It looks so menacing for some reason, but it works. And the resolution is pretty awesome. It's honestly a really good episode, but maybe I am a bit too biased because it's so relatable. Oh boy, Pet Sitter Pat. I honestly wanted to say, hey, it's not that bad, but upon rewatching, I really don't think that's the case. I was hoping for it's so bad it's funny, but that's also not the case. Patrick really is dumb and oblivious to the point where it's so frustrating. And poor Gary is in so much pain. It goes to the D tier. I know there's that subplot with SpongeBob Grandma and it's all wholesome, but it's nowhere near enough to bring it up to the higher tier. This episode is pretty dull, not gonna lie. First half is literally that long setup, one scene with just going around Sandy's Streetum, which is also repeated right after. To be fair, the backgrounds and all the places are kinda interesting, but it really gets just boring quickly. Then the third of the episode is SpongeBob teaching Patrick how to behave, and then the robots have a rampage, which is really cool. But it's also a scene that literally gets repeated right after that. And then Sandy's back and the episode is over. It goes to the C tier. The episode's structure is terrible and repetitive, and it just gets really boring. But we still get some funny dialogues and humor sprinkled in. Plus, as I mentioned, the rampage is really cool. So it brings up the episode just a little bit. Okay, so despite all the obvious flaws we all know of, let's talk about all the positive things first, because there are a few. First, it's just that overall smooth jazz music and atmosphere, all the designs of the people, a lot of backgrounds and details. SpongeBob and Kelpie duo at the very end. Plus it's all during night, which amplifies the atmosphere. For me, it all matters a lot here. But obviously we have those major problems like Patrick just being really obnoxious and unlikable. But even then, I can see funny in his behavior. It's like, so bad is hilarious. Bigger problem for me is Squidward just being treated really badly in this episode. But you know what? I'm putting this one in B tier. There is bad, but there is good. I can say with confidence it's massively overhated. This episode is bizarre, in a positive way of course. The main jarring thing here is the beginning. That long and mostly boring setup takes up almost a half of the episode, which is such a bummer. They could put a lot of things here, but ignoring that, the premise of the episode is really awesome. They really have a lot of great ideas this season, but they all suffer from those long and boring setups. Another detail that I really like is how SpongeBob hates the fresh air and the surface world. Makes sense. And how Sandy is slowly getting crazier and crazier. And naturally, I love how they all try to help Sandy. Although, characters sucking on other characters is not my cup of tea. And the ending is also really cool. Despite the slow beginning, it does deserve an S tier. Unfortunately, I can only say this episode is like a cliche of an apprentice trying to impress his master, and it must train a lot, and you know the drill. There are cliches that I like, and there are the cliches I am not a fan of. And that one is like on the bottom part of the spectrum. I'm not saying it's terrible, it's just kind of predictable. You know SpongeBob will be bad at first, and then he's gonna show his worthiness at the Krusty Krab. And don't get me wrong, it's all really cool, but we all have seen this many times. It just B tier in my opinion. But hey, if you like it more, that's cool. Also, this close-up is awesome. It reminds me of that one from Who Bop What Pants. Season 8 just keeps on giving those banger sci-fi episodes. Another one that I absolutely love is this one. It's like the proof this season can execute episodes much better than the previous ones. Although Whelk Attack would fit right into Season 8 with no problems. So setup here actually isn't that long. Krabby Patty grows slowly, but everything has been established really quickly. And it's better to see the gradual growth of the Krabby Patty, how it's slowly getting out of control. And naturally, the rampage it's causing is also really great. And this solution is clever. It's nice to see SpongeBob using his absorbing powers not only for liquids. So the title of this one is misleading. It's not about Bubble Buddy, more like his son, but that's not a huge thing. I actually like all the adventures Shiny has and all the mischief he's causing. They definitely try to put a lot of humorous stuff and it works. It's all pretty amusing, but the pacing slows down a bit sometimes. And I guess it's also refreshing to see SpongeBob getting hurt at once, not only everybody around him. Overall, I'll put this one in A tier. It's a nice little adventure with some Season 8 charm sprinkled in, and people should not view this episode with the nostalgia goggles just because Bubble Buddy was in Season 2. And I love how the money rain magically heals all the injured people. I love the premise of this episode, honestly. SpongeBob has finally gone too far, and makes sense Squidward finally wants to have some peace and literally gets a restraining order. Concept is pretty dark, but I love it. We get a painful setup, but we needed to have a setup so we can see how Squidward snaps. And I really appreciate that they still wanted to show them trying to work like that. But for me, what sells this episode is Patrick. A lot of you will probably disagree with me, but I think he is absolutely hilarious. The whole sequence of him just following Squidward, it's so dumb, it's just funny. And Squidward gets a nice revenge in a fight at the very end, so S tier. I am serious. Good concept and a lot of hilarious moments. This episode is alright. I am a fan of that storyboard stuff and the commercial at the very beginning. I also really enjoy how Fiasco makes his art and how everyone react to it before and after Squidward says it's really valuable. I'm not really bothered by Plankton stealing it, but I'm really bothered by how the whole plate was able to fit in that tiny bag and that the whole chase sequence just takes too long. The ending is pretty cool though, not gonna lie. Overall, this episode is B. It's mildly interesting, but most of the time it's just eh. It's kinda just there. It definitely should have had more stuff put into it. Are you happy now? Right off the bat, the beginning does drag a bit too long with SpongeBob giggling and it's jarring. Then Squidward not being able to recall a single happiest memory is obviously exaggerated and made up just for this episode. Obviously he had a lot of good moments throughout the entire show, but sure, let's pretend that he doesn't have any. Then it's very nice for SpongeBob to try and give him some good memories. And that's a huge plus, even though for some reason the universe is just against Squidward. I think the whole sequence with Squidward being so depressed is unnecessary. Especially the ending it all jokes. That's a bit too much, but props to them for at least trying to balance it out with SpongeBob being goofy and still trying to make the situation better. It will go to a C tier. A depression episode shouldn't be produced like this one was. There are better ways to do it, but it's always risky. But still, at least SpongeBob tries to help. And the ending is kinda cool. And obviously, that wouldn't magically cure the depression, but they obviously had to try and end this episode on a positive note. Alright, so there's no denying how awesome Planet of the Jellyfish is. Another episode that fully uses the 11 minutes, and it feels like there's so much in it. The setup is almost instant, and the whole episode just feels great with that mystery, with the creepiness, with the alien invasion. I don't have to mention that it is an S tier episode. The idea of the alien itself is honestly really great, how he uses minions for all this job. And I really appreciate how they just said that they gave all the jellyfish to everybody. And then the nest in the freezer is also really awesome, as well as the fight with the alien. What not to love about this episode? And I don't think it's overrated. It deserves all the glory. This episode is pretty bland, but hear me out. It's not because of the slow pacing or because they didn't try to make it interesting. No, it has the Season 8 charm and they try to put some funny dialogues and moments. I like the scene at the Krusty Krab. The problem is just the problem of the episode itself. It's just about 3 samples. First Plankton makes 3 samples, then he makes fake Krabby Patties, but SpongeBob saves the day by making a regular Krabby Patties, but just calling them new. See? It's like too simple even for season 8. And unfortunately that's really hindering. Trust me, the episode isn't bad. It's just too simplistic. I'll put it in B. For all the funny gags and moments, the Krusty Krab scene and the ending was really energetic and had cool visuals. And it's nice to see SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs laying so happily on a pile of money. This episode is pretty simple, not in a bad way, quite the opposite. Makes sense that sooner or later SpongeBob's pineapple would start to rot, and they do an excellent job showing that, how it all collapses slowly. And what is really fantastic is how all the main characters just gather together and rebuild SpongeBob's pineapple in their own unique ways. The whole sequence is just enjoyable to watch. And good to have some screen time of SpongeBob actually trying to live in that new house. And all that variety of backgrounds look really cool. I also love how it all collapses because of Squidward. It's funny and it makes sense. And the ending gag of canned pineapple was really clever. S tier for this episode. People really don't give it a chance. They only call this a rip-off of Home Sweet Pineapple, which it clearly isn't. They are two separate things. The only jarring thing about this episode is Patrick's dream. It's too long for some reason. Honestly, from all the Karen Plankton melodrama episodes, this one is my favorite. Or probably one of my favorites. Plankton literally built a new wife. That's hardcore. What a jerk. Poor Karen. Honestly, none of that melodrama bothers me at all. It's all enjoyable. It's kinda funny to see Karen working at the Krusty Krab, and SpongeBob's and Mr. Krabs' reactions are hilarious. It's S tier. The conflicts are amazing, the fights are too, and I admit, the ending is really cute and wholesome. Another episode that's just crazy in a positive way. I absolutely enjoy that weird dream sequence. I love when I myself get a weird dream. And believe me, I go to work all tired and sleepy so many times. The episode is super relatable. And sometimes when I have trouble sleeping, I also try many different things to help me. So I guess that's also relatable as well. But most of the time it's just me watching YouTube until I fall asleep. It's S tier. Excellent execution and a great watch. Of course, Mr. Krabs kinda sets it up for himself, but I like how the story goes full circle and he actually does get that correct amount of mustard. So face freeze is not bad at all. Clearly the premise of the episode was to give storyboarders and animators a lot of fun. And maybe they had some sort of competition who will draw a weirder face and model. They are pretty amusing. I also find Mr. Krabs' story to be really hilarious. And also when it turns out that it was actually true. My favorite face of the episode actually belongs to Mr. Krabs. Another thing the episode does okay is how Sandy tries to help SpongeBob and Patrick, despite them not wearing a helmet, but that wouldn't make sense. And I appreciate how they actually showed SpongeBob trying to work like that. I'm putting it in the S tier. This may be the most unfortunate episode in the general public, just because at the beginning a person didn't like it and his opinion just snowballed. I don't get the hate. I was pretty much smiling and laughing throughout the entire episode. And another episode that gets the short end of the stick. While yeah, the glove world is in a bad condition, it's dangerous and it shouldn't be operated, like people are literally getting hurt, it's still very wholesome for SpongeBob and Patrick to try and fix it. And as always, I just enjoy the visuals and backgrounds. I'll at least give it a B. Sure, it is far from perfect, but people are too harsh on this one. They really tried to make it somewhat funny and enjoyable. Another charming one, and who would have thought, actually relatable because of past few years. Despite kinda being a slow pacer, they again just tried to put some funny scenes, which all resulted in that season 8 charm. And that's pretty much it. A little adventure of getting sick at work and going home. Although I never pretended to be sick at work, that's just not my nature. I can understand why sometimes you would like to do that. Funniest part of the episode is definitely SpongeBob, first just protecting himself from the disease, and then when he finally catches it, he tries all that crazy remedies. And obviously they are just jokes. Nobody would put legs into a boiling oil just to cure a common cold. And the ending is also fun. It goes in the A tier. There's a lot going on. Woohoo! It's Demolition Doofus. So into the positives. The beginning is really energetic and fast-paced. I like it. Mrs. Puff has an accident, but the way she inflates and crashes into the lighthouse makes sense for the context of the episode, and it's a good setup, and the animation itself is done really nicely. And the demolition derby is a highlight of the episode. It's nice to have some of that stuff, but obviously we have the problems too. And the main one isn't even Mrs. Puff. It's SpongeBob just doing everything and getting away with it and behaving so oblivious and unlikable. And for Mrs. Puff, I can understand her hatred. She's left disfigured, so it's understandable that she would be completely pissed at SpongeBob. People can't think reasonably during anger, but yes, she probably went too far anyway. The episode goes in the C tier. Despite all bad, Demolition Derby is actually great, and the beginning looks kinda nice, so they actually bring it up to a higher tier. Treats has a wonderful message. Sometimes we just have to say no to others, instead of forcing ourselves to doing things we don't want to do and pleasing everybody. And besides that, the episode has a lot of other positives. The whole adventure sequence is brilliant. Gary having fun and enjoying those treats. SpongeBob genuinely wanted to make Gary happy. It almost made it to the S tier, but it's gonna land in A. Gary's constant meowing does get on my nerves a little. And that commercial at the very beginning is a bit too long, and honestly it's weird. And I do kinda feel bad for SpongeBob, seeing him all tired and worn out. I gotta admit it, that's probably my favorite episode of Season 8. First is the actual idea. Plankton can legitimately win a Krabby Patty and Krabs just doesn't want to let him. And Plankton trying the legal way makes a lot of sense. And how he is just getting stalled by Mr. Krabs and SpongeBob. It's just so funny, it gets me every time. But Plankton just keeps on trying and trying, but they just stall him more and more. I don't know why, it just makes everything so hilarious. And the ending is hilarious as well. Plankton actually won and then rips a Krabby Patty right out of his stomach. And it's horrible. It's dark, but I absolutely love it. I honestly think this is a Season 9A episode in disguise. I believe that was actually the last thing to be produced for Season 8, so during transition to Season 9, and you can clearly see that by the writing style, and the widescreen, and the opening credits being just like in 9A. And in general, it doesn't have that Season 8 feeling, but it's still technically Season 8, so I need to include it here. Okay, so I think the stop motion is beautiful. Massive respect to the animation team for pulling this off, and that sort of stuff is, in my opinion, really great for a Christmas special. It just reminds me of all those old cartoons and stop motion and all kinds of animation and puppets from my childhood. But other than that, I think this episode is a bit overrated. Well, it's still gonna land in A tier, there's no reason for it not to go there. I like Plankton's plan with that jerk element and how it turns everybody into jerks. The backgrounds have really nice designs. I like that robot SpongeBob and the destruction it causes. And yeah, the songs are good and all, but my personal biggest problem with this episode is SpongeBob himself. He's like too big of a child here. He like cares a bit too much. And he's so concerned and enthusiastic and happy and positive and optimistic. Basically his Season 9A character. Which, spoiler alert, it's, in my opinion, the worst in the entire series. But we'll get to that. So yeah. Also, patchy segments, they're okay. Again, they're nothing amazing. I guess he also had a nice little adventure. This episode is pretty horrible. Unfortunately, the slower pacing gets another victim. Again, it feels like every single scene just drags on and on forever. Also, Man Ray must be at his worst in the franchise. He's not evil and he's just kind of there. It's kind of frustrating to watch him in this episode. And the setup, again, takes way too long. Most of the runtime of this episode could have been something amazing. An amazing team-up episode between Plankton and Man Ray, but they just didn't do that. That's why it goes to the C tier. Don't get me wrong, despite all the bads, I think there's still quite a lot of that Season 8 charm here. Like, they knew it's probably gonna be slow, but all the individual bits and character interactions are actually kinda funny. And there are just all those random gags and character designs that give me a little smile. Also, I guess it's cool for SpongeBob to actually try get Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy for help. I think this episode does an amazing job at utilizing all 11 minutes. Something that a lot of episodes really struggle with. Because honestly, they put so many things here, it doesn't even feel like an 11 minutes episode, it feels even longer. Plankton and Squidward are a really interesting combo, and it's great to see them both succeeding at something. Although they were a bit too harsh for SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs. But on the other hand, it's kinda understandable. It also makes sense that they failed in the way they did. Squidward just got way too overconfident. It's an S-tier episode. As I said, pretty much everything here is done correctly. Squidward and Plankton working together and succeeding at something, and the very ending also gave me a little smile. This episode is full of that Season 8 charm. You can say it's repetitive, but you can also say they really tried to make everything unique by putting a lot of details and funny dialogues, and overall making it positive. And I think that deserves an A. And the episode is pretty much that. A charming, simple, enjoyable watch, with tons of funny gags which people don't realize are there. The repetitiveness isn't that big of a problem. Also, some of the people were already eating at the Krusty Krab before. I know the show doesn't really have that much of continuity, but I really wanted to point it out. And so is the very next one. In a sense, it feels like a direct sequel to The Good Krabby Name. But they put a lot more stuff into this one and really made it a big deal. A lot of the scenes are executed very well. I love their competition to get the signatures. And I also like how Plankton is the one who ultimately wins, even if at first they thought he failed. And of course, the ending twist is amazing. This episode is definitely a really enjoyable watch, so it's pretty obvious that it goes to the S tier. Alright, I admit it, this episode is awesome. The music is pretty dope. I really like a concept of this kind of adventure and having a tour. They really made it a great job of keeping it interesting, even if you clearly see that the tour idea isn't working out for them. And besides that, the episode just has a lot of things that makes it enjoyable. This episode is an easy S tier. My personal favorite part is the last quarter of the episode. When it's sunset and then night. That last song is easily one of my favorites. And the very ending was also very funny and positive. We finally end a season on a positive note. It's been a while. Let's take a look at these numbers. So there are 22 episodes in the S tier, which is 46.8%, 10 episodes in A tier, which is 21.2%, 8 episodes in B tier, which is 17%, 6 episodes in C tier, which is 12.7%, and there's only 1 episode in D tier, which makes 2.1%. Maximum amount of points for Season 8 was 235, and Season 8 scored 187, which is 79.5%. Which means Season 8 is an A tier season. I was honestly hoping we would get to at least 80%. We are like almost there, but again, statistics are statistics. Honestly, I still believe Season 8 is massively underrated. It's so charming and fun to watch. And I've pretty much said everything up to this point, so I don't really have much of final thoughts, except maybe just asking you to really give this season a chance. Some of the best episodes were really amazing. And as I said many times, there's a lot to appreciate. Some things are just hiding in plain sight. And again, I think the producers were aware of the slower pace of the season, but really tried to put all these chuckle-worthy moments to make up for it. Either way, I really hope I managed to change your point of view on these seasons and make you realize that those 3 seasons are not actually that bad. But now we are just left with the last batch of episodes for this video in Season 9A. This is also where my overall tone will shift a bit, so stay tuned. And here we are, Season 9A, which I foreshadowed will be something else. And I gotta say, I'm really not a fan of Season 9A. While I wanted to be positive for Season 6, 7 and 8, Season 9A is just a different kind of worms. First, let me remind you, why am I calling this Season 9A? It was just Season 9 at first, until like 2013, when they stopped producing new episodes because they were focusing on making the second movie. After they were done, in 2015, we got brand new episodes, which were just so funny. Had great plots, great atmosphere. They were just miles more entertaining. They just got the nickname Season 9B, while Season 9A almost doesn't have any of that stuff. People first praised season 9 when it started, because it was in 60:9 HD, but it doesn't really matter. It's, in my opinion, a downgrade from season 8. While I admit the pace was much faster and they definitely tried to put a lot of stuff into the episodes, it felt like the producers were only making those episodes for the sake of making them. There's like very little love put into it. If you watch season 9A episodes, you don't really feel involved into this. Most of the episodes just feel too nice. And they were really playing it safe now. And that made it not really entertaining. From the top of my head, I can only recall 2 jokes that were a bit darker: when the cop sniffed the tissue in Jailbreak and when SpongeBob went on a break in Little Yellow Book. That was obviously a metaphor to smoking. Unfortunately, season 9A was just stripped of everything fun, and the whole style and the atmosphere just makes you not really care about what is happening. And speaking of the style, characters look really off-model. They are perhaps the worst in the entire series. SpongeBob is especially bad. Constantly out of model, and most of the time it feels like he has a neutral face. The characters, whether they are smiling or crying or whatever, they feel expressionless. Though it did kinda improve as the season progressed. And even how every character talks bothers me. They sound much different than every other season. They are just too happy and polite. Even now in general, watching season 9A is odd. Almost all episodes don't have much rewatchability. So this is what I meant when I was constantly mentioning season 9A. I don't really like it. I no longer have the defending attitude. Although I will still try to be fair with these episodes. Just like every other up to this point. And there are actually a handful of good things about this. So here is the tiering system, and let's take a look. Our first episode of the season is exactly everything wrong with season 9A. So they tried to make it energetic and dynamic. Stuff is going on, but just something doesn't feel right. I can excuse characters looking really off-model here. It's their first HD widescreen animation for a long time since Truth or Square, so they need to get used to this. But I don't know, that overall season 9A aura, it's really apparent here, and it will be for next couple of episodes. But I still think it deserves an A tier. For all the goods, they are trying, but it just can't quite cut it to the S tier. Same with this one really. Premise, good idea, there's energy and dynamic, but there's something missing. Like, the stuff is happening, but you don't really care about all of this. There is no charm in it. Again, the highest it can go is A tier for all the good stuff, but they are struggling to make it like amazing. Maybe that's the problem. They tried too much to make the episode safe and good. They just overdone it. Patrick Man is pretty bad. Another good example of season 9A just skewing everything. This might be the worst of Patrick in the entire series. They tried to make his obliviousness and stupidity funny, but it isn't. It's pretty frustrating to watch actually. And of course, he gets away with everything he does. Why not? This one goes in the D tier. Dirty Bubble was honestly the best part of the episode. How it just pops out of nowhere from an old lady. And the fight was pretty cool, but it's at the very end, so good luck making it there. Gary's new toy. Well, who would have thought they tried to make these episodes really safe and good and nice and polite. Again, they are just overdoing it. I'm actually glad that we got Gary as the main focus of the episode. And while I'm not a fan of the first part of the episode, I enjoy how the ball starts to take Gary's mind and becomes a villain. It's a B-tier episode. I enjoyed the fact that it's a Gary plot, but nothing special anyway. Okay, so we get something cooler now in License to Milkshake. The idea is silly in a good way. Having a training in an academy for a milkshake license of all things. As you can see, they really tried to make it fun and energetic, but I don't really know how to feel about all this. SpongeBob actually not being good at something is quite unique, but he does get his license after all, after just rescuing the captain. Besides, it's just about a milkshake, so perhaps this idea is way too silly after all. I don't really know anymore. I'll put this episode in B tier. They tried, but yet again, there's like no charm. Stuff is just happening. I gotta agree. This episode is disturbing, like it's a peak season 9A with the infant humor. Literally, seeing SpongeBob and Patrick behaving like 6-month-old children is creepy. I get that childhood toys and memories kinda bring you back to that era, but it's just so exaggerated. I personally also sometimes recall some childhood memories by looking at my own childhood photos, but I don't like behaving like a toddler when I watch them. The sequence of Squidward getting hurt is like decently executed. I kinda like the idea that a head trauma causes him to behave like a child, because it just makes sense. In real life, head traumas can have variety of consequences, so at least that's believable. But again, seeing him just being a baby is poorly executed. Mainly because SpongeBob and Patrick constantly hurt him, which isn't funny at all, but even they are growing tired of him. And the scene at the Krusty Krab is also pretty bad, changing the diaper in front of all people. It's gross. I kinda like the ending though. I guess it makes sense that ice would reduce the inflammation. I mean, obviously it wouldn't work like that in real life, it wouldn't magically cure you. But for a cartoonish ending, it works pretty well. It's clever. I'm glad they used ice instead of more head injury to cure him. Overall, it's a D-tier episode. That one is extremely unnecessary and poorly executed. Little Yellow Book is overhated a bit. Actually, majority of the problems with the episode are just in the last third, when SpongeBob is crying a lot and Squidward is being just so hated. And all of that just for reading a diary. And all of that just for reading a diary. Like, sure, it's understandable that SpongeBob would cry, that would be kinda embarrassing, but people of Bikini Bottom just over-exaggerate the problem. Come on, leaving Squidward homeless just because he read a diary? That's just way too much. Same with just putting him in the pillory in public. Plus, it turns out the diary is now a bestseller. Yeah, the last third of the episode is just such a mess. But the first half isn't actually that bad. Squidward finding the diary and reading some of it is something I could see he would be doing, that's within his character. Plus, I guess all of us just have some natural curiosity and would like to see what's actually inside. First entry is pretty wholesome. I don't think Squidward reading latter entries are that bad. They were all obviously made up just for this episode. So, like, who cares really? But still, I guess it is reading someone's diary, but still, it is reading someone's diary, so people being mad at Squidward and calling him out is kinda justified. He was obviously doing wrong stuff, but still, it's just too exaggerated. And the diary becomes a bestseller after all, so I guess all these events don't matter at all. Nonetheless, still, they try to put some humor into it. Overall, this episode is a huge mess. I'll give it a C. Again, just for the good stuff in the first half of the episode, people are just way too harsh on it. But still, the episode is a mess and it's actually a stock cliche plot. And I know Patrick wanted to eat the diaper, it's really gross, and it shouldn't be in the episode at all. I'm pretty sure the title of this episode, Little Yellow Book, is about Squidward reading like SpongeBob. He's reading SpongeBob's diary, he's like reading SpongeBob and SpongeBob is yellow, therefore Yellow Book. Get it? Okay, so what is to like about Bumper to Bumper is an attempt to really make SpongeBob a good driver. Well, kinda. There's always that kinda. First part of the episode is mainly the setup. It's okay, kinda in a depressing style. It looks like this is a theme for Season 9A. Then the second part is pretty cool. The trippy part is okay. It's trippy in a positive way. The whole sequence on a highway is good. The ending, well, I guess it kinda makes sense. As it is, the whole episode is okay. It's gonna go to the B tier. It's slow at times, SpongeBob focusing on the road is kinda predictable. The episode is like the middle of the road. Okay, so I don't think this is overrated. In my opinion, what's really liked by the fans in Season 9A should be kept and preserved. As we can already see, every good bit about Season 9A is very important. So this episode does a lot of things right. It's energetic, dynamic, there's a lot of teamwork to capture that urchin, and it's all pretty good. It can go to the S tier. And despite having some of the Season 9A aura, it's definitely not that jarring. Except the ending. The ending is pretty predictable, but definitely way more good than bad here. Squid defense is pretty cliche. It's pretty cool to have a Squidward and Sandy episode, but it's just that plot of a newbie trying to learn martial art and is forced to do those mundane tasks for its master. It's gonna go to the C tier. It's not the worst, I guess. It's cool to see Squidward doing some karate, but it just feels so bland. Traditionally for a 9A episode. That threat at the beginning was kinda cool, but nah, that was just a regular guy and Squidward got punished for punching him. I get that they tried to make a twist, but it was just so unsatisfying. Instead, that should have been a real criminal and Squidward should have saved the day or Bikini Bottom or something. Jailbreak is almost perfect. I love the idea and every little sequence they put into this. It has a much darker tone than the rest of the episodes, and all character interactions are really good. But the problem is that Season 9A aura, and unfortunately it's pretty apparent here. Doesn't allow this episode to go to the S tier, the highest it can go is A tier. I watched this episode and despite it being about jailbreak, you can see they still try to be really nice and play it safe. It's so hindering. Besides, it is the only appearance of Greenhorn Rag. Which is another problem of Season 9A. Most of the banger tracks won't return until Season 9B. Evil Spatula is pretty much all that glitters done correctly, even for Season 9A standards. It's one of the better Plankton's plans. I like that spatula idea and how Plankton basically must develop a friendship with SpongeBob, and its design is pretty nice. That spatula collection itself has a wonderful background, and all the functions of the spatula are pretty cool. And I love how they fooled Plankton at the end. Honestly, it's a pretty neat episode. It'll go to an A tier. It is better than the most of what Season 9A has to offer. Okay, so this episode actually keeps me invested in watching more than the others. It's a pretty cool idea for a special, and not gonna lie, they are finally doing a much better job at entertaining than when the season has started, although the Season 9 aura is still present. I'm actually gonna put it in S tier. There's a lot of mystery, action, and the widescreen is finally properly utilized. Most of the time the widescreen used to look kinda empty on the sides. It's actually a really nice episode. I like how the characters interact with the goo and stuff. Good job Season 9A, you are heading in a good direction. This one is one of the best appearances of Mr. Krabs. His obsession with money is pretty decently executed at the beginning. The best part is obviously him being inside the vault, and how initially he thinks he's in heaven, but if you have too much of good stuff, it becomes hell. This episode is a nice little adventure and it deserves an S tier. However, I think again SpongeBob and Patrick scenes are kinda hindering just because they are Season 9A versions of themselves. But it's not that terrible, and the ending is pretty sweet. Why is this episode so loved and praised? I personally don't understand. Yeah, Spot is adorable, and Plankton caring for him is really cute and wholesome and all, but that's the problem. It's too adorable, too cute and wholesome. Sure, it's cool to see Plankton being happy, and Spot is actually a recurring character later in the series, and on itself Spot is pretty hilarious how he steals the Krabby Patty and dissolves it, and them two looking for him is also kinda cool. This episode just doesn't click for me personally. I'll put it in B. Like, it doesn't do anything wrong, but I just choke on those good vibes. Okay, so I need to give credit where credit is due. As I said at the beginning of the Season 9A review, majority of the time, the characters felt pretty flat. Until now, when we are slowly approaching the ending, it honestly the first time where the emotions of the characters made me smile and sometimes even laugh. Their fear here is actually pretty funny, and I was genuinely curious what was gonna happen next. This episode has plenty of funny gags and moments, and also a great Halloween atmosphere. I must say this is the first time in Season A when I'm actually genuinely happy to put something into S tier. Squidward scaring them was so hilarious, and pretty much the entire episode is really enjoyable. Too bad I can't really say that about the next one. Unfortunately, we are like back to the traditional Season 9A formula, where the stuff is happening but you can see the characters are pretty flat. Everything is just there. The idea of having a seance just to get a formula for an old sandwich is pretty great. I love the nighttime atmosphere, and especially when the Krusty Krabs gets haunted, but I don't know, it all feels like uninspired. I like the rampage at the end of the episode, but it's only a short scene at the end, so it doesn't add much to the table. I'll give it a B. Again, it doesn't do stuff terribly, it's just kinda eh. Why do people hate on this episode so much? I think it's pretty okay. The setup might be a bit too long, and SpongeBob does go a bit too far with liking Kenny so much. But honestly, I feel like we are all a huge fan of something. And there's nothing wrong in being a fan. Even the episode acknowledges that SpongeBob goes way too far, which actually makes the big reveal more understandable. It's also another of those late Season 9A episodes where the characters are just really dynamic. Kenny being a fake also makes sense from the very beginning, and he does get his comeuppance for lying. Overall, I think this episode is pretty positive and energetic. It goes in the S tier. I personally really like it. This episode gets points for trying to be unique and not feeling like the earlier episodes. It's definitely overhated for some reason. I gotta say, despite the main plot starting in like halfway of the episode, there is some charm in the first half. Like, it's just these three at work. It reminds me of me, where I am at work, when I'm just alone with a group of friends and just talking to each other and having a good time. And I think Mr. Krabs does a good job at setting up the episode in the meantime. And SpongeBob's paranoia is really amusing. I like the overall dynamics this episode has. Even Squidward trying to solve this problem was cool. I'm actually gonna put it in S tier. It's enjoyable and dynamic. Again, Season 9A in those later episodes was really changing into a good direction. It's almost a perfect transition to Season 9B. Well, besides the next and the last episode, but definitely not least. We couldn't have a more perfect episode to end this video on. SpongeBob, you're fired. It's so bad that it's actually hilarious. It really gives me that it's so bad that it's good and funny vibes. Because honestly, you are watching it and you can't believe they actually produced something like this. I agree, it is terrible, but I would still consider it overhated. All the reviewers are really angry at this one. So some things I agree with. First is the plot. It makes zero sense and it's all over the place. Krabs firing SpongeBob for a nickel is stupid. 2 minutes of just crying and nothing else. SpongeBob making a good food that isn't Krabby Patty for Gary, which contradicts everything we have seen. And so that whole scene, despite being wholesome, it doesn't matter at all. It isn't brought up later in this episode or anything. And of course, Krusty Krab is a failure without SpongeBob. It's pretty obvious that that was just a cash grab, a clickbaity title just to get views. So why not actually put some effort into it and make it interesting? SpongeBob could open his own snail food business and outrun Krabs. And if you really want to put back SpongeBob at the end of the episode to the Krusty Krab, he could just like share some of his profits and stocks with Mr. Krabs or something like that, I don't know. But you may think, what about the rest of the episode? Well, the rest of the episode isn't really as bad as people are making it to be. I enjoy all the places SpongeBob goes to and all the characters. It all has unique and fun designs. All parts with Patrick are kinda amusing. Part with Sandy is kinda dark, but I like it. The kidnappings and overall fight scenes are pretty decent. And the beginning as well as the ending have good energy in them. So I guess the C tier is the best for the episode. Just like its definition. All bad things about it are pretty bad, but the episode isn't without its little positives. And as I mentioned already, you can just laugh at this episode because how bad and lazy it is. So we actually did it! So not as many episodes, but it's just Season 9A, a batch of episodes before the second movie, and obviously there's still Season 9B, which I'm gonna consider in its own separate video and make all the ratings for Season 9 as a whole thing, but I still want to do the ratings for Season 9A separately. So we've got 6 episodes in S tier, which is 30%, 4 episodes in A tier, which is 20%, 5 episodes in B tier, which is 25%, 3 episodes in C tier, which is 15%, and 2 episodes in D tier, which is 10%. The maximum score for 9A was 100, and it scored 69 points, which is obviously 69%, which means Season 9A is a B tier thing. And honestly, that's still way more than I was expecting. But I guess despite me disliking the whole thing, it did kinda improve with time. But there isn't anything that amazing that I would like to come back to. They really tried to go a different direction with this one, but was that direction correct? Again, it's all a great topic to discuss. I am really glad Season 9A stopped entirely and we got Season 9B. Of course, Season 9A is not an actual season, and when I get to Season 9B, at the very end of that, I'll just give it a proper rating for Season 9, but I'm still gonna keep a separate things for these two, because they may as well be 2 different seasons. This is it! We made it to the end. And if you are still watching, you are fantastic. Thank you so much for watching this. It took me a lot of time to make this huge video. And whether or not you agree with me and all my opinions, I'm still happy I could share all my opinions with you and making this video in general. Once again, It's okay to disagree. I really want to know your opinions on all the seasons, on all the episodes, and what I said as well. I want to cover all the remaining seasons of SpongeBob in this way as well, because that was my goal ever since the first season. I can already say the next tier list video will be about season 9B and 10 together. But first, I'm gonna take a little break, just because how much time I spent on making this one. Once again, thank you very much for watching. Write your comments with your opinions. You can also like and subscribe if you want. That's all from me, and see you later.